Larry Hoover's story begins in the unforgiving streets of Chicago, a city that has long been a battleground for power, influence, and survival. Born in the mid-20th century in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dangers were abundant, he grew up surrounded by hardship, the kind of environment where young boys quickly learned that respect and control often dictated survival, and where the line between right and wrong was blurred by circumstance. From an early age, Hoover was no stranger to the street's harsh lessons. The alleys and corners where children played were the same places where violence could erupt without warning, shaping his worldview and planting the seeds of ambition that would later define his life. Hoover was intelligent, calculating, and observant, qualities that allowed him to read people and situations with an almost uncanny precision. He noticed the dynamics of power early on, who commanded respect, who could be manipulated, and who was simply trying to survive. The streets taught him a language that schools never could, a language of influence, intimidation, and strategic alliances. Unlike many of his peers, who either fell victim to violence or drifted aimlessly, Hoover understood the value of organization and foresight. He didn't just react to circumstances. He began to see the potential to control them. By the time he reached adolescence, Hoover's presence in his neighborhood had started to command attention. He was involved in small-scale hustles at first, learning the ins and outs of street-level operation. These early experiences were crucial. They provided him with a foundation in the mechanics of power, money, and loyalty. He understood that to rise, one needed not only strength but intelligence, strategy, and the ability to inspire fear and respect simultaneously. His peers recognized that Hoover was different. Where others were impulsive, he was measured. Where others sought momentary gains, he sought influence and longevity. The 1960s in Chicago were turbulent, a period marked by social upheaval, economic challenges, and the rise of organized street gangs. Hoover gravitated toward these groups, initially as a participant but soon as a leader in the making. He understood that gangs were not merely collections of young men seeking identity. They were complex organizations with hierarchies, rules, and power structures. In these groups, he saw an opportunity to apply his intellect, creating order out of chaos, and gradually positioning himself as someone not just involved, but indispensable. His ability to mediate conflicts, enforce rules, and orchestrate operations earned him the respect of both his peers and rivals. As Hoover's influence grew, so did his vision. He recognized that controlling the streets was not enough. He needed to build a structured organization capable of extending its reach far beyond the immediate neighborhood. This vision led to the formalization of the gang that would eventually become known as the Gangster Disciples, one of Chicago's most notorious and powerful street organizations. Hoover emphasized structure, loyalty, and strategic alliances, transforming a chaotic street-level operation into an entity with a clear hierarchy and an organized approach to both protection and expansion. Members were expected to follow strict codes of conduct, and those who proved themselves loyal were rewarded with power and opportunity. Money, power, and influence became intertwined in Hoover's strategy. He realized early on that controlling resources meant controlling people. Drug trafficking, protection rackets, and other illicit ventures were not merely criminal enterprises, they were tools of leverage, ensuring loyalty and obedience. Hoover was meticulous about maintaining secrecy and discipline within his ranks. Betrayal was not tolerated, and intelligence about rivals and allies alike was carefully collected and analyzed. Unlike many street-level leaders who relied solely on fear, Hoover combined fear with respect, creating an environment where members felt both loyalty and obligation. What set Hoover apart from other gang leaders was his foresight and ambition. While many operated within the confines of their neighborhoods, Hoover envisioned influence that transcended local borders. He began establishing networks that connected with other gangs, political figures, and community leaders. His ability to navigate these diverse spheres of power was remarkable. It was clear to anyone observing his rise that Hoover was not content with fleeting control. He was constructing a criminal empire with longevity and resilience at its core. Hoover's ascent, however, was not without challenges. Rival gangs, law enforcement, and internal dissent posed constant threats. Yet, he had cultivated a leadership style that combined charisma with intimidation, strategy with adaptability. Conflicts were managed carefully, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through calculated force, but always with the goal of preserving the organization's stability and his own authority. Each confrontation, each challenge honed his skills and reinforced his reputation. He became known not just as a gang leader, but as a strategic thinker, whose influence extended far beyond the immediate streets of Chicago. Even as Hoover's power solidified on the streets, his ambitions continued to evolve. He recognized the importance of perception and reputation in maintaining control, community presence, disciplined conduct among members, and an image of invincibility were all parts of a sophisticated strategy. Hoover's leadership was as much about optics as it was about operational control. He understood that fear and respect could be amplified through careful management of public perception and internal loyalty. By the end of this initial period of his rise, Larry Hoover had transformed from a street-savvy youth into a formidable gang leader whose influence was undeniable. His ability to blend intelligence, strategy, and raw street authority allowed him to dominate in ways few could challenge. Hoover was not just a participant in the world of organized crime. He was a visionary who understood the mechanics of power, the value of loyalty, and the necessity of control. The foundation he built during these years would later enable him to exert influence, even from within the confines of a prison cell, a testament to the meticulous planning, ambition, and strategic thinking that defined his life and legacy. As Larry Hoover's influence grew on the streets of Chicago, his ambitions became ever more audacious. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the landscape of organized street gangs in Chicago was evolving rapidly. The chaotic, fragmented system of small gangs fighting over territory presented both danger and opportunity. Hoover recognized that leadership alone was not enough. True power required consolidation, discipline, and strategic expansion. He set out to transform the Gangster Disciples from a neighborhood-based crew into a sprawling, organized network that could exert control over multiple communities and generate substantial revenue. Hoover's approach was methodical. He prioritized loyalty and intelligence within his ranks, carefully selecting individuals who could both enforce his vision and maintain the organization's operational secrecy. Trust was not assumed, it was earned. Members were trained to follow strict codes of conduct, not only to protect the gang but to cultivate a sense of unity and purpose. This level of structure was unusual for street gangs at the time, many of which were prone to chaos, impulsive decisions, and internecine violence. Hoover's emphasis on discipline gave the Gangster Disciples a competitive edge, allowing them to outmaneuver rivals while maintaining a semblance of order within their own organization. One of Hoover's key strategies was the unification of smaller gangs under his leadership. He understood that fragmentation weakened power, while consolidation amplified it. Negotiations, alliances, and, when necessary, intimidation were all part of his toolkit. Rival gang leaders soon realized that Hoover was not a conventional adversary. He was strategic, calculating, and patient. He preferred to expand influence through diplomacy and loyalty rather than brute force alone, though he never hesitated to employ violence when the situation demanded it. Through this careful combination of negotiation and controlled aggression, Hoover gradually brought multiple street factions under the Gangster Disciples umbrella, creating a network that spanned neighborhoods and provided a platform for further expansion. As the organization grew, Hoover began to diversify its operations. While street-level drug sales remained a primary source of income, he understood that long-term power required financial sophistication. Protection rackets, loan operations, and other illicit enterprises were carefully managed to maximize profit while minimizing exposure to law enforcement. Hoover's strategic mind allowed him to compartmentalize operations, ensuring that, even if one segment faced disruption, the broader organization remained intact. This foresight was rare among gang leaders, many of whom focused on immediate gains without considering sustainability. Hoover's vision, by contrast, was long-term. He sought not just dominance over the streets, but enduring control and influence. The structure Hoover established within the Gangster Disciples was remarkably hierarchical for a street gang. Leadership positions were clearly defined, responsibilities were delegated, and operational protocols were enforced with near military precision. Communication channels were established, with trusted lieutenants acting as intermediaries to maintain both efficiency and security. Hoover's insistence on discipline created an organization that could adapt, respond, and expand with remarkable agility. Members were trained to be loyal, resourceful, and aware of both internal and external threats. This careful cultivation of structure and hierarchy distinguished Hoover's empire from others, turning a violent street operation into a disciplined, resilient institution. By the mid-1970s, Hoover's name had become synonymous with power on Chicago's South Side. His reputation extended beyond the immediate neighborhoods under his control. Law enforcement, rival gangs, and even local political figures were acutely aware of his influence. Hoover understood the power of perception and leveraged it masterfully. Maintaining an aura of invincibility was not merely a psychological tactic. It was a practical tool for controlling both allies and adversaries. Rumors, strategic appearances, and carefully managed interactions enhanced his mystique, making him a figure to be respected, feared, and watched closely. Despite the outward appearance of control, Hoover's path was fraught with danger. Rival gangs sought to challenge his authority. Law enforcement intensified efforts to disrupt his operations, and internal dissent threatened the cohesion of his organization. Hoover's response was a combination of intelligence gathering, strategic enforcement, and preemptive measures. He was meticulous about understanding potential threats, analyzing motivations, and implementing measures to neutralize risks. Violence was calculated, never arbitrary, and loyalty was rewarded while betrayal was swiftly punished. Hoover's ability to navigate this dangerous landscape, maintaining power without succumbing to chaos, solidified his reputation as one of Chicago's most formidable gang leaders. Hoover's ambitions were not confined to financial gain or territorial control. He sought influence over the social and political fabric of his environment. He understood that power extended beyond streets and money. It was reinforced by reputation, alliances, and perception. Engaging with community figures, positioning loyal members in key areas, and maintaining a visible presence in neighborhoods allowed him to extend his reach while cultivating a sense of inevitability around his authority. Hoover's vision was comprehensive, a criminal empire that commanded not only respect but strategic advantage across multiple layers of society. As Hoover's organization expanded, so too did his personal discipline and approach to leadership. He was known for his sharp intellect, strategic thinking, and ability to anticipate challenges. Every decision was calculated, every move deliberate. Unlike impulsive leaders who relied on brute force alone, Hoover combined fear with admiration, ensuring that loyalty was motivated not merely by intimidation but also by respect for his strategic brilliance. His influence extended into realms that few gang leaders could access, from negotiating truces with rivals to understand the nuances of law enforcement strategies, demonstrating an unparalleled capacity to adapt and survive. However, Hoover's rise inevitably attracted the attention of authorities. By the late 1970s, law enforcement agencies were increasingly aware of the Gangster Disciples' growing influence, wealth, and structured operations. Hoover's empire, though resilient, was under scrutiny. He was no stranger to legal challenges and had already experienced arrests and investigations, but his ability to maintain control, communicate strategically, and manage loyal lieutenants allowed his operations to continue largely uninterrupted. Hoover's awareness of law enforcement tactics and his proactive measures to safeguard his empire ensured that he remained a dominant figure, even as external pressures mounted. Throughout this period, Hoover's ability to blend street-level operations with strategic foresight defined the trajectory of his criminal empire. He recognized the importance of long-term planning, structural integrity, and perception management. His leadership transformed a collection of street-level operations into a disciplined, hierarchical organization capable of generating substantial revenue, influencing community dynamics, and withstanding both internal and external challenges. The foundations he built during these years would later enable him to extend influence even from prison, a testament to his strategic vision, intelligence, and unwavering ambition. By the time Hoover had fully established the Gangster Disciples as a dominant force in Chicago, he had achieved what few street-level leaders ever did: the creation of a disciplined, structured, and far-reaching criminal enterprise. His ability to balance strategic alliances, operational control, and personal influence ensured that the organization could thrive even amidst the constant threats that characterized the violent landscape of Chicago. Hoover's rise was not the result of luck or brute force alone. It was a product of careful planning, acute intelligence, and an unrelenting drive to consolidate power and build a lasting legacy. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Larry Hoover's influence on the streets of Chicago had reached unprecedented levels. The Gangster Disciples had grown from a collection of small, loosely organized factions into a disciplined and powerful network that spanned multiple neighborhoods and influenced the social, political, and economic dynamics of the city's South Side. Hoover's strategic mind, keen sense of human behavior, and ability to orchestrate complex operations allowed him to consolidate control over territory and resources in a way few street leaders could replicate. This period marked the peak of his street power, where his vision of a structured, loyal, and far-reaching organization came to fruition. Hoover's leadership style was an intricate blend of fear, respect, and strategic diplomacy. Members of the Gangster Disciples understood that loyalty was rewarded with protection, opportunity, and influence, while betrayal carried severe consequences. This balance allowed Hoover to maintain internal cohesion even as the organization expanded rapidly. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who relied primarily on intimidation and violence, Hoover implemented a system of operational protocols, hierarchy, and accountability. His lieutenants were carefully selected and trained to manage day-to-day operations, enforce rules, and ensure that communication flowed efficiently from the top to the rank-and-file members. The result was a criminal organization that functioned with remarkable precision, capable of adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining stability and control. During this period, Hoover's influence extended beyond traditional gang activities. While street-level drug operations and protection rackets remained central to the organization's revenue, he also invested in more complex ventures that increased both profit and power. Money laundering, connections with influential political figures, and strategic alliances with other criminal networks allowed Hoover to expand his reach while reducing vulnerability to law enforcement scrutiny. He understood that sustainable power required both financial sophistication and strategic foresight. By diversifying operations and cultivating relationships with key players outside the immediate criminal sphere, Hoover created a web of influence that extended far beyond the streets he directly controlled. The consolidation of power brought Hoover into direct conflict with rival gangs. The landscape of Chicago's organized crime was violent and unpredictable, with territorial disputes, personal vendettas, and competition for resources fueling ongoing conflict. Hoover's approach to rivals combined calculated diplomacy with controlled aggression. He sought to establish dominance through strategic alliances when possible, but he was always prepared to employ force when necessary. Skirmishes were not random acts of violence. They were tactical maneuvers designed to reinforce authority, eliminate threats, and maintain control over critical areas. Hoover's ability to navigate these conflicts while preserving organizational stability further cemented his reputation as a formidable leader. One of Hoover's most significant achievements during this era was the creation of a disciplined communication network within the Gangster Disciples. Information flow was critical to maintaining control, coordinating operations, and preventing infiltration by law enforcement or rival gangs. Trusted lieutenants were responsible for overseeing communication channels, ensuring that orders were executed efficiently and intelligence was collected and analyzed. This network allowed Hoover to maintain influence over operations across the city, even in situations where he was not physically present. It also enabled him to anticipate challenges, respond to threats proactively, and maintain a level of control that was rare for street-level organizations of this size. Hoover's ability to manage perception was another critical element of his power. He understood that reputation was as important as operational control. Stories of his intelligence, strategic thinking, and ability to exact swift consequences for betrayal spread throughout the city. Community members, law enforcement, and rival gang members alike recognized Hoover as a leader whose influence was extensive and whose presence could not be ignored. By cultivating a persona that combined mystique with strategic visibility, Hoover enhanced his authority while deterring challenges to his power. Fear and respect became tools that reinforced the structural and operational strength of the Gangster Disciples. Despite his dominance, Hoover's empire was not invincible. Law enforcement attention intensified as his organization grew. Investigations, surveillance, and undercover operations increasingly targeted the Gangster Disciples. Hoover was well aware of the risks and implemented measures to safeguard the organization and protect his personal freedom. Operational compartmentalization, strict codes of conduct, and intelligence gathering were all part of a strategy to reduce exposure and maintain control. Hoover's ability to anticipate law enforcement tactics and respond proactively ensured that the organization continued to operate effectively even as scrutiny increased. This period also revealed Hoover's ability to influence social dynamics beyond the criminal world. He understood the importance of positioning his organization in a way that intersected with the broader community. By cultivating loyal members who engaged with neighborhoods strategically, he created a sense of order and protection that extended his influence while reducing friction with local residents. Hoover's leadership was multifaceted. It combined criminal enterprise with strategic community engagement, reputation management, and tactical foresight. This combination made him one of the most influential and resilient figures in Chicago's organized crime landscape. As Hoover's power reached its peak on the streets, early signs of vulnerability began to emerge. Law enforcement agencies intensified efforts to disrupt his operations using surveillance, informants, and legal tactics to gather evidence against him. Hoover, however, remained several steps ahead, using intelligence, strategic communication, and organizational discipline to shield himself and maintain control. He delegated responsibilities to trusted lieutenants, ensuring that the organization could function effectively even under increasing scrutiny. This ability to adapt to growing pressure demonstrated both his foresight and the strength of the hierarchical system he had meticulously built. By the early 1980s, Larry Hoover's criminal empire had achieved a level of sophistication and reached that few gang leaders could match. The Gangster Disciples were not only a powerful street gang, but a highly organized network capable of complex operations, strategic alliances, and sustained influence across Chicago. Hoover's leadership combined operational control, strategic vision, reputation management, and long-term planning, creating a model of organized street power that would influence criminal organizations for decades. Even as external pressures mounted, Hoover's careful planning and disciplined approach ensured that his influence remained largely intact, setting the stage for both unprecedented power and the legal challenges that would eventually reshape his life. Hoover's story during this era exemplifies the intricate interplay between ambition, intelligence, and strategic foresight. His rise to the peak of street power was not the result of impulsive decisions or reckless violence. It was a calculated, deliberate effort to build a sustainable empire. By combining discipline, loyalty, and operational sophistication, Hoover created a criminal organization that could withstand internal and external challenges, maintain influence, and generate significant revenue. The groundwork laid during this period would later enable him to exert control and influence even from within the confines of a prison cell, illustrating the extraordinary combination of strategy, foresight, and ambition that defined his life and legacy. By the mid-1980s, the meteoric rise of Larry Hoover and the Gangster Disciples had captured the full attention of law enforcement agencies across Chicago. Hoover's criminal empire, once a relatively localized network, had become a sprawling organization, with influence spanning neighborhoods, illicit markets, and social dynamics. The structure he had meticulously built, emphasizing discipline, hierarchy, and loyalty, made him both powerful and elusive. Yet, no empire, no matter how well organized, could remain invisible indefinitely, and Hoover was about to face legal pressures that would test both his organization and his ability to maintain control from a distance. The legal challenges began as increased scrutiny from local and federal law enforcement, intensified investigations into the Gangster Disciples operation. Agents and officers had observed patterns of organized criminal activity, including drug trafficking, extortion, and violent enforcement tactics. Hoover, aware of the growing threat, relied heavily on his strategic foresight to shield himself. Operational compartmentalization ensured that the knowledge of illicit activities was distributed in such a way that he remained insulated. Trusted lieutenants were tasked with overseeing day-to-day activities, maintaining communication chains, and enforcing loyalty among members. Hoover understood that his arrest, while a possibility, did not have to dismantle the organization. His foresight and planning ensured that the empire could endure even in his absence. In 1989, Hoover's calculated distance from street operations could only protect him for so long. Authorities finally made significant legal inroads, and Hoover was arrested on charges related to conspiracy, drug trafficking, and organized criminal activity. The arrest sent shockwaves through Chicago. For many, it seemed that the reign of the Gangster Disciples might finally be coming to an end. Yet, Hoover's approach to leadership and influence was unique. While he now faced confinement, his ability to command loyalty, communicate strategically, and maintain organizational discipline meant that his empire did not collapse with his physical absence. From prison, Hoover began to exert influence in ways few gang leaders could replicate. Letters, coded messages, and trusted intermediaries allowed him to maintain contact with lieutenants and key operatives. The hierarchical structure he had developed earlier became a vital asset, ensuring that orders could flow efficiently and that operations could continue even under scrutiny. Hoover's understanding of organizational psychology, how loyalty, fear, and respect could be balanced, enabled him to maintain authority despite the physical barriers imposed by incarceration. He was no longer a street-level operator but a strategist controlling a vast network from behind bars. Prison life was not without its challenges. Hoover faced the constant threat of rival inmates, scrutiny from prison officials, and the psychological strain of confinement. Yet, his discipline and strategic thinking allowed him to navigate this environment effectively. He understood the importance of projecting authority and maintaining respect among both fellow inmates and those within the system. Hoover's intelligence, combined with his ability to adapt, ensured that his presence continued to be felt even within the rigid confines of prison walls. His influence extended beyond personal survival. It encompassed the continued functioning of the Gangster Disciples and the management of the organization's complex operations. While Hoover maintained control, law enforcement and the judicial system intensified efforts to dismantle the Gangster Disciples. RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations, statutes, and federal investigation became central tools in targeting organized criminal networks. Hoover's empire, highly structured and deeply rooted in loyalty, proved resilient against these efforts, but the pressure was constant. Court appearances, legal maneuvers, and extended investigations characterized this period, highlighting the ongoing struggle between law enforcement's efforts to dismantle organized crime and Hoover's capacity for strategic evasion and control. Even from prison, Hoover emphasized the importance of loyalty, discipline, and organizational growth. He continued to guide operations, instructing lieutenants on how to manage territory enforce rules, and maximize revenue streams. His communication was deliberate, often symbolic, and carried the weight of authority. Members of the Gangster Disciples understood that Hoover's guidance was not optional, it was binding. The adherence ensured that the organization continued to operate efficiently, demonstrating the enduring strength of the hierarchical system Hoover had cultivated before his arrest. During this period, Hoover also became acutely aware of the need to manage perception both inside and outside prison walls. Maintaining a sense of invincibility and respect was crucial. He leveraged the media, legal proceedings, and strategic alliances to craft an image of resilience, intellect, and authority. This careful management of reputation not only protected him personally, but also reinforced the structure and morale of the Gangster Disciples. Members continued to see Hoover as a central figure of power, someone whose influence transcended the confines of a prison cell. Despite the constraints of incarceration, Hoover's strategic mind remained active. He continued to evaluate risks, monitor operations, and anticipate moves by both rivals and law enforcement. This ability to maintain influence under extreme limitations was a testament to his intelligence, discipline, and the foresight he had demonstrated throughout his rise. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, it was clear that Hoover's leadership was not confined to physical presence. It was institutional, embedded in the structure, culture, and loyalty of the organization he had meticulously built. The legal pressures Hoover faced also forced adaptations in the organization. Operations became more compartmentalized, communication channels more secure, and enforcement more disciplined. Hoover's lieutenants were empowered to make tactical decisions, but all major strategic directives flowed from him. This model allowed the Gangster Disciples to continue expanding influence, controlling territory, and maintaining revenue streams despite the constant legal and logistical challenges. Hoover's ability to balance control with delegation exemplified the sophisticated approach he had cultivated since the early days of his rise. Even as the judicial system pursued extended sentences and sought to dismantle his empire, Hoover's influence persisted. He became an example of how leadership, strategy, and organizational discipline could extend power beyond physical limitation. The Gangster Disciples remained a dominant force in Chicago, executing operations with precision and loyalty. Hoover's personal story during this period highlighted the intersection of intelligence, foresight, and resilience, a narrative of power maintained through strategy, discipline, and unyielding ambition. By maintaining control from behind bars, Larry Hoover demonstrated a unique form of criminal leadership. His empire was not just surviving, it was operating effectively, managing internal cohesion, and responding to external pressures. The period of incarceration marked a transition from street-level dominance to strategic, institutional influence. Hoover's ability to adapt to confinement, while ensuring the continued strength of his organization, exemplified the sophistication, intelligence, and long-term vision that had defined his rise and would continue to shape his legacy for decades to come. Even behind bars, Larry Hoover's influence over the Gangster Disciples not only endured, it expanded. The years following his incarceration were marked by an extraordinary display of strategic control, a testament to the organizational infrastructure he had built prior to imprisonment. Hoover's genius lay in his understanding that physical confinement did not equate to the loss of power. Leadership, when structured correctly, could transcend the walls of a prison and shape operations across entire cities. He understood that to sustain dominance, he needed to ensure loyalty, discipline, and clear communication, and he implemented systems that allowed him to do exactly that. Hoover's communication with the outside world was carefully managed. Letters, intermediaries, and trusted messengers became the lifelines through which orders, strategic advice, and operational guidance flowed. Every message was meticulously crafted, carrying not only instructions but also reinforcing his authority and the culture of loyalty within the gang. Members of the Gangster Disciples understood that Hoover's words were law. Decisions made in his absence were bound by the vision he had set in motion decades earlier. This method of remote leadership allowed the organization to maintain cohesion even as pressure from law enforcement mounted, creating a level of operational continuity few criminal organizations could achieve under similar circumstances. During this period, Hoover's empire grew in sophistication and reach. He recognized that maintaining influence required more than loyalty. It demanded strategic planning and careful management of resources. Operations were divided into sectors, each overseen by trusted lieutenants who reported directly to him. Revenue streams from drug trafficking, protection schemes, and other criminal enterprises were carefully monitored and optimized. Hoover emphasized the importance of consistency and discipline, ensuring that even under stress, the organization functioned as a cohesive unit. This level of organizational maturity was unprecedented for street gangs at the time, and it reflected Hoover's ability to transform raw street power into a durable and adaptable criminal enterprise. Hoover also understood the importance of perception. His reputation as an unyielding and intelligent leader was a crucial element in maintaining control. Stories of his strategic acumen, discipline, and ability to enforce loyalty spread beyond the confines of Chicago, reaching other gangs, law enforcement, and the media. By cultivating this image, Hoover enhanced his authority, ensuring that even those outside his immediate organization viewed him as a figure not to be challenged. This psychological influence complemented his operational control, reinforcing the hierarchy and discipline that kept the Gangster Disciples functioning efficiently despite incarceration. As Hoover maintained control, he also adapted to the evolving landscape of crime. The 1990s brought new challenges, including increased federal attention, the rise of rival organizations, and changing dynamics within urban communities. Hoover's approach to these challenges was methodical. He relied on trusted lieutenants to monitor rival activity, gather intelligence, and enforce strategic priorities. Operations were compartmentalized to limit exposure, and communication networks were continuously refined to ensure that orders could be executed without compromising security. Hoover's foresight and attention to detail allowed the Gangster Disciples to not only survive but thrive in an era of increasing complexity and scrutiny. The leadership structure Hoover had established proved remarkably resilient. Responsibilities were clearly defined, and authority was delegated in a way that allowed the organization to function independently while remaining aligned with Hoover's strategic vision. Lieutenants were empowered to make tactical decisions, but all major operational strategies flowed from Hoover's directives. This system ensured that even when faced with internal dissent or external pressure, the organization maintained unity and focus. Hoover's emphasis on discipline, loyalty, and strategic thinking created a culture in which the Gangster Disciples operated with efficiency, precision, and cohesion. Even in confinement, Hoover remained acutely aware of the importance of personal influence. He used interactions with fellow inmates, prison staff, and visitors to reinforce his reputation, projecting authority and demonstrating that his power extended beyond the walls of his cell. These efforts were not merely symbolic. They were tactical, shaping perceptions, reinforcing loyalty, and deterring challenges. Hoover's understanding of human behavior, social dynamics, and strategic communication allowed him to maintain a commanding presence despite the constraints of imprisonment, further solidifying his control over the Gangster Disciples. As federal authorities intensified their efforts to disrupt organized criminal networks, Hoover's ability to adapt was tested. RICO investigations, undercover operations, and asset seizures presented new challenges, yet Hoover's empire remained resilient. He emphasized operational security, instructed lieutenants on risk mitigation, and monitored developments closely. This strategic approach allowed the Gangster Disciples to continue generating revenue, enforcing territory, and maintaining loyalty even under the most intense scrutiny. Hoover's ability to navigate these challenges reflected both his intelligence and the strength of the organizational infrastructure he had meticulously cultivated over decades. During this period, Hoover also extended his influence beyond Chicago. He understood the value of alliances and networks, collaborating with other organizations and individuals who could provide strategic advantage. These alliances were carefully managed to maximize benefit while minimizing risk, allowing the Gangster Disciples to extend their reach and influence into new markets and territories. Hoover's vision was expansive, demonstrating that leadership, when combined with strategic foresight, could transcend physical limitations and geographic boundaries. Despite the pressures of incarceration, Hoover remained a central figure in the ongoing evolution of the Gangster Disciples. He continued to emphasize the principles that had guided his rise: loyalty, discipline, strategic planning, and operational efficiency. These principles were embedded into the culture of the organization, ensuring that even as the leadership faced external threats, the core values and operational structures remained intact. Hoover's ability to maintain authority under such conditions was a testament to his foresight, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to control. By the mid-1990s, it was evident that Larry Hoover had achieved something few leaders, criminal or otherwise, ever accomplished: the ability to control and expand a vast organization from a position of physical confinement. His influence was felt across Chicago, within the ranks of the Gangster Disciples, and in the broader landscape of organized crime. The empire he had built was not only resilient but adaptable, capable of navigating challenges, expanding reach, and maintaining cohesion despite the pressures of law enforcement, rivalries, and incarceration. Hoover's story during this period exemplifies the power of strategic leadership, discipline, and the ability to adapt to extreme circumstances while maintaining control over a complex and far-reaching organization. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Larry Hoover's reputation as one of the most formidable gang leaders in American history had become firmly established. Even confined within the walls of a high-security prison, his ability to maintain and expand influence was unmatched. The Gangster Disciples, the organization he had meticulously built and disciplined over decades, continued to operate with remarkable efficiency, demonstrating the strength of the hierarchical structures, communication channels, and loyalty systems Hoover had implemented. He had transformed a street-level gang into a sophisticated criminal enterprise capable of enduring intense external pressures while continuing to generate revenue and exert influence across multiple states. Prison had become a strategic vantage point for Hoover. He recognized that his personal freedom was limited, but his ability to shape the organization, guide operations, and manage rivalries remained powerful. Letters, coded messages, and carefully chosen intermediaries allowed him to communicate with key lieutenants, ensuring that his strategic vision was implemented faithfully. Every instruction reinforced not only operational objectives, but also his authority, loyalty, and the organizational culture that had been his foundation since the early days on the streets of Chicago. Hoover's genius lay in his understanding that leadership was not about physical presence but about influence, and he wielded it with precision. During this period, Hoover focused heavily on expanding the reach of the Gangster Disciples beyond Chicago. He understood that limiting influence to one city made the organization vulnerable to concentrated law enforcement efforts and rival aggression. By establishing networks and alliances in other states, he sought to create a multi-region presence, ensuring that the Gangster Disciples remained resilient. Trusted lieutenants were tasked with cultivating these alliances, managing operations, and identifying opportunities for expansion, all while adhering strictly to the protocols Hoover had established. These efforts demonstrated Hoover's long-term strategic vision, transforming a once local street gang into a network capable of influencing criminal dynamics across the Midwest and beyond. Hoover's approach to managing these multi-state networks was rooted in discipline, hierarchy, and accountability. Each operational region had clearly defined leadership, with lieutenants reporting back to Hoover or his inner circle. Communication channels were monitored, coded, and secure, minimizing the risk of infiltration by law enforcement. Hoover emphasized the importance of loyalty and accountability, ensuring that members understood the consequences of deviation from organizational directives. The Gangster Disciples became a model of operational efficiency in the world of organized street crime, capable of managing complex operations without collapsing under scrutiny or pressure. Even as he extended influence, Hoover remained deeply aware of the importance of perception and reputation. The aura he cultivated over decades, intelligence, discipline, strategic foresight was instrumental in maintaining authority both within prison walls and across the gang network. Stories of his leadership, combined with the organization's continued dominance in Chicago and beyond, reinforced the idea that challenging Hoover was both futile and dangerous. Rival gangs, federal authorities, and even new recruits recognized his enduring power, which allowed him to maintain control and guide the organization with minimal direct interference. Hoover's understanding of psychology and strategic influence ensured that his authority was never questioned, despite physical confinement. This period also saw Hoover navigating complex interactions with federal authorities. Investigations, surveillance, and legal pressures continued to target him and the Gangster Disciples. Hoover's response was methodical. He used intermediaries, compartmentalized operations, and maintained strict discipline to minimize exposure. Every directive emphasized security, loyalty, and adherence to protocols. The organization's ability to continue operating efficiently despite ongoing federal scrutiny demonstrated both the resilience of its structure and Hoover's strategic brilliance. He had transformed his incarceration into a platform for remote leadership, ensuring that law enforcement efforts could never fully dismantle the empire he had built. As Hoover's influence expanded into other states, he also focused on internal cohesion. Long-term survival required not just loyalty, but ideological alignment and cultural unity within the gang. He emphasized the importance of discipline, ethics within the criminal code, and adherence to the organizational hierarchy. By embedding these principles into the culture of the Gangster Disciples, Hoover created a resilient organization capable of sustaining power even under extreme external pressure. Members internalized the importance of loyalty and operational discipline, understanding that their personal success and safety were tied directly to adherence to Hoover's vision. The expansion of influence and the reinforcement of organizational discipline allowed the Gangster Disciples to extend operations into new markets. Drug distribution, protection schemes, and strategic partnerships with other gangs became part of a multi-state network, all coordinated indirectly under Hoover's leadership. The scale of these operations was unprecedented for a street-level organization led from prison. Hoover's ability to guide strategy, maintain control, and enforce discipline across such a broad network demonstrated a level of criminal sophistication rarely seen in modern history. Hoover's leadership during this era was also characterized by adaptability. He understood that the criminal landscape was constantly evolving with new rivals, technological changes, and shifts in law enforcement tactics, presenting ongoing challenges. He adjusted strategies proactively, communicated contingencies to lieutenants, and ensured that the Gangster Disciples could respond dynamically to emerging threats. This flexibility, combined with the rigid discipline he enforced within the organization, created a balance that allowed Hoover's empire to thrive even under intense pressure. Despite the limitations imposed by prison life, Hoover continued to be a central figure in shaping the culture and direction of the Gangster Disciples. His vision extended far beyond immediate profits or territorial control. He sought to build an enduring legacy, a criminal institution capable of surviving leadership transitions and external threats. The systems he implemented, hierarchical control, secure communication, strategic alliance, and cultural reinforcement, ensured that his influence would remain strong for decades. Hoover's ability to maintain power from confinement demonstrated an extraordinary combination of intelligence, foresight, and leadership skill. By the early 2000s, Larry Hoover's story had become emblematic of strategic criminal leadership. His ability to maintain and expand influence, orchestrate multi-state operations, and ensure organizational cohesion from behind bars highlighted the unique intersection of intellect, ambition, and discipline. The Gangster Disciples remained a dominant force in Chicago and beyond, a testament to Hoover's enduring vision and his ability to command loyalty, respect, and fear simultaneously. Even in the most restrictive environment, Hoover had transformed incarceration into a platform for continued dominance, reinforcing his legacy as one of the most powerful and strategic gang leaders in American history. As the 2000s progressed, Larry Hoover's reach extended far beyond Chicago, evolving into a network that connected multiple gangs, criminal enterprises, and territories across the United States. Hoover's strategic vision had always included expansion and alliance, but his incarceration made this ambition even more remarkable. From within the confines of prison, he orchestrated relationships with other criminal organizations, carefully navigating rivalries and opportunities to create a broader network of influence. Hoover understood that power in the modern criminal landscape required collaboration as much as domination, and he leveraged his reputation, intelligence, and strategic foresight to forge connections that extended the reach of the Gangster Disciples on a national scale. Hoover's reputation preceded him. Across states, gang leaders and members knew of the disciplined, highly organized network he commanded from prison. His name carried weight in criminal circles, not because of brute force alone, but because of his strategic thinking and ability to enforce loyalty and operational discipline. This allowed him to negotiate alliances with other gangs, often mediate conflicts and facilitating cooperation for mutual benefit. Hoover's approach was always deliberate. Alliances were formed based on strategic advantage, loyalty, and the potential for revenue growth, while minimizing risks to his organization. His ability to think several steps ahead created an unprecedented level of influence that extended far beyond his physical confinement. The Gangster Disciples themselves had evolved into a national presence, largely due to Hoover's direct oversight. Regional leaders were empowered to manage local operations, but they remained firmly accountable to Hoover's directives. The organization operated with remarkable efficiency. Revenue from drug distribution, protection schemes, and other illicit ventures was coordinated through a hierarchical structure that allowed for centralized strategic control without exposing Hoover directly to operational risk. Communication networks, carefully monitored and controlled, ensured that strategic priorities were executed with precision. Hoover's vision had created an organization that functioned as a highly adaptable network, capable of responding to threats, seizing opportunities, and sustaining influence across multiple regions. As Hoover expanded influence, he also focused on consolidating control over existing territories. The Gangster Disciples were no longer confined to street corners in Chicago. They controlled neighborhoods, managed operations across state lines, and maintained authority over members who were dispersed yet loyal. Hoover emphasized that discipline, loyalty, and adherence to organizational codes were non-negotiable. Betrayal, disobedience, or deviation from strategy were met with swift consequences, reinforcing the culture of respect and fear that had been central to his leadership since the organization's early days. Members internalized this culture, understanding that their personal safety, success, and status were intrinsically tied to loyalty and obedience to Hoover's vision. Federal authorities, fully aware of Hoover's expanding influence, intensified their efforts to dismantle his empire. Investigations spanned multiple states, involving coordinated operations, informants, and advanced surveillance techniques. Yet, Hoover's organizational design allowed him to absorb these pressures without collapsing. By compartmentalizing operations, delegating tactical authority, and maintaining secure communication channels, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples could continue functioning despite increased federal scrutiny. His ability to adapt to evolving legal and law enforcement pressures highlighted both his intelligence and the sophistication of the criminal enterprise he had built. One of Hoover's most remarkable achievements during this period was his ability to maintain cohesion among geographically dispersed members. Leadership from prison required a delicate balance, empowering lieutenants to manage local operations while ensuring they remained aligned with his strategic vision. Hoover employed methods of accountability that included reporting structures, code, messaging, and trusted intermediaries, all designed to prevent fragmentation. The Gangster Disciples remained unified not through proximity or direct oversight, but through a shared understanding of organizational culture, loyalty, and the central authority Hoover embodied. This level of cohesion across vast distances was extraordinary in the world of organized crime and reflected Hoover's long-term strategic thinking. National alliances and expanded networks also brought new challenges. Hoover had to manage relationships with rival gangs, navigate conflicts, and negotiate truces when necessary. His reputation as an intelligent, calculating, and disciplined leader allowed him to mediate effectively. Conflicts were handled with strategic precision, often using negotiation, intimidation, or selective force to achieve desired outcomes. Hoover's approach was always rooted in long-term objectives, maintaining control, reducing risk, and strengthening the organization's influence. His ability to manage complex relationships across diverse networks showcased his unparalleled understanding of power dynamics in criminal enterprises. Hoover's continued influence was not limited to criminal operations alone. He understood the importance of reputation, psychology, and perception in sustaining authority. Stories of his intellect, discipline, and capacity to command loyalty spread both within and outside criminal circles, creating an aura of invincibility. This perception reinforced obedience, deterred challenges, and enhanced his ability to orchestrate alliances and expand operations. Hoover's mastery of influence went beyond tangible actions. It extended into the realm of psychological power, shaping behavior and expectations across a network that spanned multiple states. During this era, Hoover also faced renewed legal battles. Federal prosecutors targeted him with a combination of criminal charges and civil actions, aiming to disrupt the organization and remove him from power permanently. Investigations were extensive, leveraging RICO statutes and a focus on dismantling leadership hierarchies. Yet Hoover's ability to maintain distance from day-to-day operations, combined with his strategic delegation and operational compartmentalization, allowed him to withstand these pressures. The Gangster Disciples continued functioning efficiently, demonstrating the resilience of the organizational structure Hoover had built over decades. Despite the increasing scrutiny and legal threats, Hoover remained committed to his vision. His strategy emphasized both short-term operational efficiency and long-term sustainability. He continued to oversee alliances, monitor rival activity, and guide the organization's expansion into new territories. The Gangster Disciples became a multi-regional, highly disciplined network, demonstrating that leadership, when combined with strategic foresight, could transcend physical confinement and operate effectively under immense pressure. Hoover's ability to manage such a complex organization remotely was a testament to his intelligence, strategic thinking, and understanding of organizational dynamics. By the mid-2000s, it was evident that Larry Hoover had achieved something extraordinary. He had created a criminal empire capable of enduring federal pressure, expanding geographically, and maintaining cohesion across thousands of members, all while he remained confined. The Gangster Disciples operated as a highly disciplined, sophisticated network that combined revenue generation, territorial control, and strategic alliances with a culture of loyalty and respect. Hoover's ability to maintain authority, guide operations, and expand influence from prison solidified his legacy as one of the most powerful and strategic gang leaders in American history. As the 2000s progressed, Larry Hoover's empire faced unprecedented scrutiny from federal authorities. The Gangster Disciples, once a localized network, had grown into a multi-state organization with extensive influence and revenue streams. This expansion, while a testament to Hoover's strategic brilliance, inevitably attracted intensified legal pressure. Federal prosecutors, leveraging RICO statutes, began to focus not only on street-level crimes, but also on the intricate organizational structure that allowed Hoover to command authority from prison. It was clear that dismantling the Gangster Disciples required more than targeting individual members. It required addressing the genius of the system Hoover had created. The legal actions against Hoover were sophisticated and aggressive. Federal investigations spanned multiple states, collecting evidence on communication networks, financial operations, and the hierarchy of the Gangster Disciples. Authorities sought to prove that Hoover maintained control of an organized criminal enterprise, despite incarceration, using coded communications, intermediaries, and loyal lieutenants. This approach required patience, coordination, and strategic planning, as law enforcement had to navigate the same operational security measures Hoover had put in place decades earlier. Hoover, in turn, understood that the threat of prosecution demanded adaptability, foresight, and the reinforcement of loyalty among his inner circle. Within the prison system, Hoover's response to legal pressure was calculated and disciplined. He remained an active strategist, directing operations through trusted lieutenants while maintaining strict operational security. He emphasized adherence to protocols, communication discipline, and strategic delegation, ensuring that the Gangster Disciples could continue functioning efficiently despite federal scrutiny. Hoover's ability to maintain organizational cohesion under these conditions reflected his long-standing commitment to structure, hierarchy, and the culture of loyalty he had instilled within the gang. Members understood that deviation from his directives could compromise the organization themselves, reinforcing the disciplined culture that had been central to Hoover's rise. The intensification of legal efforts also highlighted Hoover's skill in managing perception. He understood that reputation, both inside and outside prison walls, was a critical component of authority. By cultivating an image of resilience, intelligence, and strategic foresight, Hoover reinforced the idea that he remained a central figure in the organization. Stories of his leadership, both within gang networks and in broader public perception, amplified the respect and fear associated with his name. This perception management became a powerful tool, ensuring that members remained loyal, rivals remained cautious, and authorities recognized the challenge of dismantling an empire so carefully constructed. Internally, the Gangster Disciples adapted to the pressures of federal investigation. Hoover emphasized operational compartmentalization, delegation of tactical authority, and strict adherence to security measures. Leaders in various regions were tasked with monitoring rival activity, managing revenue stream, and enforcing organizational discipline, all while reporting back to Hoover's inner circle. This decentralized operational model allowed the organization to continue functioning despite the physical absence of its founder and the growing external threats. Hoover's ability to balance autonomy with accountability ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained cohesive and resilient. During this period, Hoover's strategic alliances with other gangs and criminal networks also played a crucial role in sustaining influence. By mediating conflicts, facilitating collaboration, and leveraging mutual interests, Hoover expanded the reach of the Gangster Disciples while reducing the risk of conflict that could expose vulnerabilities. These alliances were carefully managed, with Hoover ensuring that operation aligned with the broader strategic objectives of his organization. His ability to negotiate, influence, and coordinate across multiple networks reflected a level of sophistication rarely seen in organized street crime. Hoover's legal battles were not without personal challenges. He faced extended sentences, intensive investigations, and the psychological strain of prolonged incarceration. Yet, his discipline and strategic mindset allowed him to navigate these challenges with remarkable composure. He remained focused on the long-term objectives of the organization, understanding that short-term setbacks in the legal system did not equate to the collapse of the empire he had built. Hoover's foresight, patience, and unwavering commitment to operational integrity enabled him to endure pressures that might have destabilized a less disciplined leader. The evolution of the Gangster Disciples during this period was a testament to Hoover's vision. The organization became increasingly sophisticated, combining operational efficiency with strategic foresight and loyalty enforcement. Regional leaders were empowered to manage day-to-day activities, but the central vision, strategic priorities, and core values remained tightly controlled. Hoover's leadership created a culture in which members internalized the importance of discipline, hierarchy, and obedience. This internalization ensured that operations could continue seamlessly, even as external pressures intensified. Hoover also recognized the importance of adapting to changes in law enforcement tactics. Surveillance technology, informants, and federal coordination required a heightened level of operational security. Hoover's approach included secure communication methods, compartmentalization of knowledge, and careful delegation. By limiting exposure and controlling information flow, He minimized risk while ensuring the continuity of strategic objectives. This adaptability was critical in maintaining the integrity of the organization and demonstrated Hoover's enduring capacity for foresight and innovation in criminal leadership. Despite mounting legal pressures, Hoover's influence continued to grow nationally. The Gangster Disciples operated with precision, expanding revenue streams, enforcing loyalty, and maintaining strategic alliances. Hoover's ability to orchestrate this level of operational sophistication from prison underscored his unique combination of intelligence, discipline, and strategic vision. He had created an organization that could endure law enforcement scrutiny, internal challenges, and the complex dynamics of national criminal networks while continuing to assert authority and influence. By the end of this period, it was evident that Hoover had mastered the art of remote leadership in the criminal world. His ability to maintain and expand influence, navigate legal pressures, and ensure organizational cohesion was unparalleled. Gangster Disciples were no longer merely a street gang. They had become a highly organized multi-state network capable of strategic operation, revenue generation, and sustained influence. Hoover's story during this era highlighted the extraordinary power of strategic foresight, disciplined leadership, and the ability to adapt to evolving threats, solidifying his legacy as one of the most formidable gang leaders in American history. As the first decade of the 2000s unfolded, Larry Hoover's influence over the Gangster Disciples reached a level that transcended traditional street-level gang leadership. The organization he had meticulously built now served as a model for gang structure, discipline, and strategic management across the United States. Hoover's genius lay in his ability to enforce control, maintain loyalty, and ensure operational efficiency, all from within the confines of a high-security prison. His empire had become a blueprint for organized criminal enterprises, demonstrating that intelligence, foresight, and strategic delegation could create sustainable power even under the most extreme constraints. Hoover's understanding of gang culture and psychology was central to his continued dominance. He recognized that loyalty was not merely enforced through fear but cultivated through respect, opportunity, and shared purpose. Members of the Gangster Disciples were expected to adhere to strict codes of conduct, maintain operational discipline, and follow the hierarchy established by Hoover decades earlier. This emphasis on organizational culture ensured cohesion, minimized internal conflict, and created a resilient framework capable of withstanding external pressures. Hoover's leadership extended beyond operational directives. It shaped the identity, values, and behavior of everyone within the network. The Gangster Disciples had grown into a multi-state entity, with operations spanning several cities and states. Hoover's influence extended through trusted lieutenants who managed local activities, monitored rival movements, and coordinated revenue streams. While these lieutenants were empowered to make tactical decisions, strategic authority remained centralized under Hoover's guidance. He used coded messages, letters, and intermediaries to communicate instructions and reinforce his authority, ensuring that the organization operated in alignment with his long-term vision. This combination of decentralization and centralized strategic control allowed the Gangster Disciples to function effectively even under intense law enforcement scrutiny. Hoover's approach to external threats was methodical and strategic. Rival gangs, aware of the Gangster Disciples' discipline structure, and Hoover's reputation, often approached conflicts with caution. Hoover leveraged negotiation, intimidation, and selective enforcement to manage rivalries, often preventing escalations that could disrupt operations. His ability to anticipate rival strategies, understand human behavior, and implement preemptive measures allowed the organization to maintain dominance without unnecessary violence. This calculated approach to conflict management was a key factor in the sustained success and resilience of the Gangster Disciples. Federal authorities continued to mount pressure on Hoover and his organization. RICO prosecutions, undercover operations, and multi-state investigations aimed to dismantle the network and neutralize Hoover's influence. Yet, the operational security, compartmentalization, and hierarchical discipline he had built over decades rendered these efforts less effective than anticipated. Hoover had created an organizational model that insulated leadership from direct exposure, allowing strategic decisions to flow without compromising the chain of command. Even under legal pressure, the Gangster Disciples continued to operate efficiently, demonstrating the robustness of Hoover's design. Hoover's influence extended beyond immediate criminal operations. He became a central figure in shaping gang culture nationwide. His emphasis on structure, loyalty, discipline, and strategic thinking influenced not only the Gangster Disciples but also other organizations that sought to emulate their operational efficiency. Hoover's model combined the revenue-driven pragmatism of organized crime with a disciplined hierarchy and a culture of accountability. This approach distinguished the Gangster Disciples from other street gangs, which often struggled with internal fragmentation and impulsive leadership. Hoover's vision had effectively professionalized gang operations, demonstrating that leadership, strategy, and organizational culture could sustain power across generations. The expansion of influence also involved strategic alliances with other criminal networks. Hoover negotiated truces, shared intelligence, and coordinated operations to maximize revenue while minimizing risk. These alliances required careful management to maintain balance, prevent betrayal, and ensure mutual benefit. Hoover's ability to navigate complex inter-gang relationships demonstrated a level of sophistication rarely seen among street-level leaders. He understood that power was not only territorial or financial, it was relational, requiring respect, trust, and strategic alignment. Through these alliances, Hoover extended the reach of the Gangster Disciples, creating a multi-layered network that operated with remarkable efficiency and discipline. Internally, Hoover reinforced loyalty and culture through a combination of mentorship, directives, and symbolic leadership. Letters, coded communications, and trusted intermediaries were used not only to instruct but to reinforce organizational values. Members were reminded of their responsibilities, the consequences of betrayal, and the broader vision of the organization. This approach fostered a sense of purpose and cohesion, ensuring that operational discipline was maintained even as the organization grew geographically. Hoover's influence was embedded into the very culture of the Gangster Disciples, creating an enduring framework that could function independently of direct oversight. Despite the immense pressures of federal investigations and incarceration, Hoover's empire continued to grow in sophistication. Operations were increasingly systematized, with revenue streams carefully monitored, territories controlled, and strategic alliances maintained. Hoover emphasized accountability at every level, ensuring that lieutenants were capable, loyal, and aligned with the organization's broader objectives. This combination of delegation, hierarchy, and operational discipline allowed the Gangster Disciples to maintain dominance even as the external environment became more complex and legally perilous. Hoover's leadership also relied heavily on perception management. He understood that respect, fear, and admiration were powerful tools for maintaining authority. Stories of his intelligence, strategic foresight, and unyielding discipline spread across gang networks and law enforcement circles alike. This reputation reinforced loyalty, deterred challenges, and enhanced Hoover's ability to direct operations remotely. Even in an era of heightened federal scrutiny, Hoover remained a central figure in the narrative of organized crime, demonstrating that authority could be sustained through perception as much as direct control. By the mid-2000s, Larry Hoover had solidified his legacy as a criminal strategist of unparalleled skill. The Gangster Disciples were no longer merely a gang, they were a disciplined, multi-state organization, operating with strategic precision, cultural cohesion, and operational resilience. Hoover's ability to maintain control under extreme legal pressure, guide strategic alliances, and shape gang culture nationwide highlighted the extraordinary combination of intelligence, foresight, and leadership that defined his life. His story exemplified the power of strategic vision, disciplined execution, and the capacity to wield influence far beyond the limitations of physical confinement. As the 2000s deepened, Larry Hoover faced new challenges that tested both his leadership and the resilience of the Gangster Disciples. Law enforcement tactics had evolved, incorporating advanced surveillance technologies, digital tracking, and coordinated multi-state operation. Federal authorities intensified efforts to dismantle the organization, targeting both street-level operations and the hierarchical structures Hoover had meticulously built over decades. Yet Hoover's response to these pressures demonstrated the extraordinary combination of strategic foresight, adaptability, and discipline that had defined his rise and sustained his influence for more than 30 years. Hoover's approach to federal scrutiny was methodical. He understood that direct contact with gang members could expose him to legal consequences, so he relied on intermediaries and trusted lieutenants to execute operations and maintain discipline. These lieutenants were chosen for their loyalty, intelligence, and ability to enforce organizational priorities. Each regional leader was responsible for reporting on operations, managing subordinate members, and implementing directives in alignment with Hoover's overarching vision. This system of delegated authority, reinforced by strict codes of accountability, allowed the Gangster Disciples to continue functioning efficiently even under the threat of federal action. One of Hoover's primary focuses during this period was internal consolidation of power. He recognized that an organization of such scale could not survive if loyalty wavered or if internal rivalries escalated unchecked. Hoover implemented measures to reinforce cohesion, including the enforcement of strict disciplinary protocols and the strategic rotation of leadership roles to prevent power struggles. Members were constantly reminded of the importance of adherence to rules, hierarchy, and organizational objectives. This emphasis on internal stability ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained a unified, disciplined, and resilient force, capable of weathering both external threats and the inherent pressures of managing a sprawling criminal enterprise. Hoover also adapted the organization to meet modern challenges. The digital era had introduced new opportunities for communication and coordination, but also increased vulnerability to surveillance and interception. Hoover's approach was cautious and deliberate. Secure communication channels were established, sensitive information was compartmentalized, and directives were often conveyed through trusted intermediaries rather than direct contact. These measures minimized exposure while maintaining operational efficiency, demonstrating Hoover's capacity to integrate modern technologies into his strategic framework without compromising security or loyalty. As federal authorities pressed harder, Hoover faced the constant threat of betrayal. Informants, undercover agents, and internal dissent posed risks to both his freedom and the organization's cohesion. Hoover's strategy for mitigating these threats was rooted in discipline, psychological insight, and reputation management. Loyalty was continually reinforced through rewards, opportunities, and recognition. While breaches were met with immediate and decisive consequences, members understood that loyalty was not optional, and the cultural norm Hoover had cultivated ensured that internal betrayal was minimized. By combining strategic foresight with a deep understanding of human behavior, Hoover was able to preserve the integrity and operational continuity of the Gangster Disciples even under extreme pressure. During this period, Hoover also maintained a keen focus on financial and operational control. Revenue streams from drug distribution protection schemes and strategic alliances were carefully monitored and managed. Lieutenants provided regular reports, and Hoover's directives emphasized efficiency, accountability, and risk mitigation. By maintaining tight control over financial operations and territorial management, Hoover ensured that the organization remained both profitable and resilient, capable of sustaining itself even amid federal crackdowns and rival challenges. This level of operational sophistication was unprecedented for a street gang operating under incarceration. Hoover's influence extended beyond the immediate operations of the Gangster Disciples. He had become a central figure in shaping the culture of gang leadership nationwide, serving as a model of strategic control, loyalty enforcement, and organizational discipline. Other gangs looked to his methods as examples of how to sustain influence, manage large networks, and navigate complex legal and operational environments. Hoover's reputation as an intelligent, calculating, and disciplined leader enhanced his authority, both within his organization and in the broader criminal ecosystem. Fear, respect, and admiration combined to reinforce his power, ensuring that challenges to his authority were minimized. As legal battles escalated, Hoover employed strategic defensive measures. He collaborated with attorneys, leveraged legal precedents, and engaged in calculated negotiations to protect his interests. While physical freedom was restricted, Hoover's influence over the organization allowed him to maintain control over strategic decisions, alliances, and territorial operations. He understood that legal constraints required adaptive thinking, and he integrated these considerations into every decision affecting the Gangster Disciples. This ability to balance legal pressures with operational control exemplified Hoover's extraordinary strategic capacity. The organization also continued to expand and solidify alliances under Hoover's guidance. Collaborative operations with other gangs were carefully orchestrated to maximize profit, reduce conflict, and enhance mutual security. Hoover's reputation as a disciplined and intelligent leader facilitated these collaborations. Potential allies recognized the strategic advantage of association with the Gangster Disciples. These alliances extended the organization's influence, creating a national network capable of coordinated action, shared intelligence, and mutual protection. Hoover's vision had effectively transformed a street gang into a multi-state criminal network with sophisticated operational capabilities. Despite the challenges posed by modern law enforcement technology, Hoover's systems of control remained highly effective. The organization adapted to changes in surveillance, digital tracking, and federal investigative techniques without compromising its operational integrity. Communication channels were secure, leadership hierarchies remained intact, and loyalty was continuously reinforced. The Gangster Disciples functioned with remarkable precision, reflecting Hoover's strategic foresight and his ability to maintain authority under conditions that would destabilize lesser leaders. By this time, Hoover had cemented his legacy as one of the most formidable gang leaders in American history. His ability to maintain control, enforce loyalty, expand influence, and adapt to modern challenges demonstrated a level of intelligence, discipline, and strategic thinking that few could rival. The Gangster Disciples were more than a criminal organization. They were a model of operational efficiency, cultural cohesion, and strategic leadership. Hoover's story during this period illustrated the extraordinary power of vision, planning, and adaptability, showcasing how leadership can transcend physical confinement to shape the destiny of an organization for decades. As Larry Hoover entered the later years of his incarceration, his focus shifted toward ensuring the long-term sustainability of the Gangster Disciples. Having established a sophisticated multi-state network, reinforced loyalty structures, and a disciplined hierarchy, Hoover now turned his attention to the organization's continuity beyond his direct involvement. He recognized that the longevity of his empire depended not only on operational efficiency, but also on preparing the next generation of leaders to uphold his vision. This required strategic succession planning, careful selection of lieutenants, and a continued emphasis on the cultural and ideological foundations that had defined the Gangster Disciples since their inception. Hoover's approach to succession was methodical. He identified loyal, capable, and strategically minded members who could assume leadership roles in his absence. These individuals were not chosen solely for their operational skills, but also for their ability to uphold the culture, discipline, and strategic priorities that Hoover had painstakingly instilled over decades. Mentorship became a crucial tool, with Hoover using layers, coded messages, and intermediaries to communicate not only operational directives but also leadership philosophies. He emphasized that leadership was about vision, accountability, and the ability to enforce loyalty without relying on brute force alone. In addition to succession planning, Hoover maintained tight control over the organization's structure and operation. The hierarchy he had established decades earlier remained intact, with regional leaders reporting to lieutenants, who in turn maintained direct lines of communication with Hoover's trusted intermediaries. This layered structure allowed for operational flexibility while ensuring that strategic objectives and organizational values were consistently enforced. Hoover understood that decentralization of day-to-day decisions could empower regional leaders, but only if it was balanced by strong oversight and alignment with the central vision. This balance between autonomy and accountability became a hallmark of his leadership style. The Gangster Disciples continued to expand their influence under Hoover's guidance. New territories were incorporated through strategic alliances, careful negotiation, and disciplined enforcement of organizational rules. Hoover's instructions emphasized minimizing unnecessary conflict, optimizing revenue streams, and maintaining cohesion across geographically dispersed operations. He understood that a fragmented or overextended organization was vulnerable to law enforcement and rival gangs, so every expansion was carefully calculated to enhance the organization's power and security. Through this approach, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained a dominant force in Chicago and beyond, capable of sustaining influence over multiple states. Loyalty remained the cornerstone of Hoover's strategy. He reinforced this through both tangible and symbolic means, rewarding compliance, demonstrating trust in capable lieutenants, and clearly defining the consequences of betrayal or negligence. This approach fostered a sense of shared purpose and accountability, embedding the principle of discipline, respect, and strategic alignment into the organization's culture. Members understood that their personal advancement and security were directly tied to adherence to Hoover's vision, creating an environment where operational cohesion and cultural alignment were inseparable. Hoover also continued to navigate the evolving landscape of federal law enforcement. Advances in technology, increased coordination between agencies, and the deployment of sophisticated investigative techniques posed ongoing threats to the organization. Hoover's response was proactive. Communication channels were secured, sensitive information was compartmentalized, and operational protocols were continuously refined. He instructed lieutenants on risk mitigation strategies, emphasizing caution, adaptability, and strategic foresight. The Gangster Disciples, under Hoover's guidance, became a model of resilience in the face of modern law enforcement challenges, capable of maintaining operations despite increased scrutiny and the complexities of multi-state coordination. The mentoring of the next generation of leaders also included a focus on ideological continuity. Hoover instilled in his lieutenants the importance of maintaining the organizational identity and values that had historically distinguished the Gangster Disciples from other gangs. Discipline, strategic thinking, loyalty, and cultural cohesion were emphasized as non-negotiable elements of leadership. Hoover recognized that operational success alone would not sustain the organization. Over time, the principles that underpinned its cohesion were equally critical. By embedding these values into the leadership pipeline, Hoover ensured that the organization would retain its unique identity and operational efficiency for decades to come. During this period, Hoover also maintained oversight of intergang alliances and conflict management. He continued to negotiate strategic truces, facilitate cooperation, and manage rivalries with precision. These interactions were guided by both intelligence and reputation management. Hoover understood that his personal authority and the perceived power of the gangster disciples were instrumental in maintaining alliances and deterring conflict. By projecting discipline, strategic acumen, and an unyielding commitment to organizational values, Hoover ensured that external relationships remained favorable, enhancing both the security and profitability of the organization. Financial oversight remained another critical focus. Hoover directed revenue strategies, monitored the distribution of resources, and enforced accountability in financial management. Operational profitability was carefully tracked, with strategies implemented to maximize revenue while minimizing risk. This level of financial control reinforced organizational discipline and ensured that resources were available for expansion, strategic alliances, and internal development. Hoover's understanding of economics, combined with his strategic foresight, allowed him to manage a highly complex multi-state operation while remaining physically confined within prison walls. The later years of Hoover's prison leadership also highlighted his resilience and adaptability. He faced ongoing legal pressures, internal challenges, and the psychological strain of long-term incarceration. Yet he remained focused on long-term strategic objectives. Every decision, directive, and mentorship effort was aimed at strengthening the Gangster Disciples, ensuring organizational continuity, and preserving the values and discipline that had been central to the gang's success. Hoover's ability to maintain authority under such conditions demonstrated an unparalleled combination of intelligence, foresight, and leadership acumen. By the end of this period, it was clear that Hoover's legacy extended beyond mere operational control. He had created an organization capable of self-sustaining growth, disciplined leadership, and strategic adaptability. The Gangster Disciples were a highly structured network with operational, financial, and cultural systems that ensured resilience in the face of legal pressures, internal challenges, and geographic expansion. Hoover's focus on mentorship, succession planning, and ideological continuity guaranteed that the organization would endure long after his direct involvement had ceased, cementing his reputation as a visionary leader in the history of organized crime. As Larry Hoover entered the later stages of his incarceration, the challenges he faced intensified, but so did his determination to maintain and expand the influence of the Gangster Disciples. By this time, the organization had evolved into a sophisticated, multi-state network capable of managing complex operations with remarkable efficiency. Hoover's understanding of leadership, strategy, and human behavior allowed him to maintain authority despite decades of confinement and increasing federal pressure. His ability to adapt to changing circumstances, anticipate threats, and reinforce loyalty became critical to the survival and growth of the organization. Federal authorities continued to view Hoover as one of the most dangerous gang leaders in the country. RICO statutes, multi-agency investigations, and surveillance operations were employed to dismantle the Gangster Disciples and neutralize Hoover's influence. These efforts were unprecedented in scale and scope, targeting not only street-level operations but also the intricate leadership hierarchy that allowed Hoover to command loyalty and control remotely. Yet Hoover's decades of preparation, disciplined systems, and organizational foresight allowed him to withstand this pressure. He had built a network resilient enough to operate under constant scrutiny, with layered leadership, secure communication channels, and a culture of loyalty that limited vulnerability. In these late years, internal management became a priority. Hoover understood that the stability of the organization depended on maintaining discipline and preventing fragmentation. Regional leaders and lieutenants were held accountable for their actions, and Hoover reinforced the importance of adherence to established codes of conduct. Deviations or betrayals were swiftly addressed, while loyalty and operational success were rewarded with increased authority and trust. This system of reinforcement ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained cohesive and disciplined, even as its influence spread across multiple states and cities. Hoover's focus on internal cohesion was critical in preventing the organizational instability that had undermined other gangs in similar circumstances. The use of technology and secure communication became increasingly important during this period. Hoover adapted to modern law enforcement methods, understanding that digital surveillance, wiretaps, and informants posed significant risks to the organization. Instructions were often relayed through trusted intermediaries, coded messages, and compartmentalized operations that limited exposure. By controlling the flow of information, Hoover minimized operational risk while maintaining effective oversight of multi-state activities. The Gangster Disciples under this system were able to continue executing complex operations without compromising strategic objectives or organizational security. Hoover also continued to manage alliances with other gangs and criminal networks. These relationships were crucial in maintaining dominance, expanding influence, and managing rivalries. influence. Hoover's reputation as a disciplined, intelligent, and strategic leader allowed him to mediate conflicts, enforce agreements, and coordinate collaborative operations. By maintaining control over these alliances, he not only expanded the Gangster Disciples' influence, but also created a network of strategic partnerships that enhanced security and profitability. This ability to navigate complex inter-gang dynamics reflected Hoover's deep understanding of power, psychology, and strategic negotiation. Financial oversight remained another key element of Hoover's leadership. Revenue from drug distribution, protection rackets, and allied operations was carefully monitored, managed, and distributed according to strategic priorities. Lieutenants reported regularly, ensuring transparency and accountability. Hoover emphasized efficiency, risk mitigation, and operational discipline, recognizing that financial stability was essential to both organizational strength and long-term sustainability. By maintaining tight control over resources, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples could fund expansion, enforce loyalty, and respond effectively to both internal and external challenges. Even as Hoover managed external pressures and operational expansion, he continued to mentor the next generation of leaders. Succession planning was no longer just a consideration, it was essential. Hoover identified capable, loyal individuals and prepared them to take on greater responsibilities within the organization. Through mentorship, instructions, and reinforcement of organizational values, Hoover ensured that the principles of discipline, loyalty, and strategic thinking would endure beyond his direct involvement. This approach guaranteed that the Gangster Disciples would remain cohesive, strategically competent, and culturally aligned, even as leadership transitioned over time. Despite the constraints of prison, Hoover maintained a careful focus on reputation management. He understood that perception was as important as operational control and sustaining influence. Stories of his intelligence, strategic foresight, and unyielding discipline spread within gang networks and law enforcement circles alike. This aura of power reinforced loyalty among members, deterred potential challengers, and maintained the organization's authority in the criminal ecosystem. Hoover's ability to wield influence psychologically, as much as operationally, ensured that his directives were obeyed and his authority remained unchallenged. The organization's adaptability was tested repeatedly during this period. Law enforcement methods evolved, rival gangs sought to exploit weaknesses, and internal pressures occasionally threatened cohesion. Hoover's strategic foresight and meticulous planning allowed the Gangster Disciples to respond effectively to these challenges. Operational compartments limited exposure. Secure communication channels ensured fidelity of information, and disciplined leadership maintained alignment with organizational goals. Hoover's approach demonstrated that resilience in a criminal enterprise required both structural sophistication and a strong organizational culture. Hoover's vision extended far beyond immediate survival. He sought to create a self-sustaining, multi-generational criminal enterprise capable of enduring leadership changes, legal pressure, and evolving criminal landscapes. By embedding core values, operational discipline, and strategic intelligence into the fabric of the organization, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples were prepared for future challenges. His long-term thinking reflected a level of strategic maturity uncommon in organized crime, combining operational control with cultural reinforcement, mentorship, and careful succession planning. By the mid-2010s, Larry Hoover's empire had evolved into a highly sophisticated network, demonstrating both operational precision and cultural cohesion. The Gangster Disciples operated as a multi-state organization capable of coordinated action, strategic alliances, and financial control, all guided by the principles Hoover had instilled decades earlier. Even under intense federal scrutiny and internal pressures, the organization remained disciplined, loyal, and strategically aligned, a testament to Hoover's enduring leadership. In summary, these later years of Hoover's prison leadership highlighted his extraordinary ability to maintain authority, adapt to modern challenges, and secure the future of the Gangster Disciples. Through careful succession planning, operational oversight, loyalty enforcement, and strategic alliances, Hoover ensured that his vision endured. The organization he had built was no longer merely a gang. It was a sophisticated, resilient network capable of sustaining influence and power for generations. Hoover's story during this period underscored the intersection of intelligence, discipline, and strategic leadership, solidifying his legacy as one of the most formidable gang leaders in American history. By the mid-2010s, Larry Hoover's influence over the Gangster Disciples had reached a scale few could have imagined. From his confinement in a high-security prison, he maintained operational control, enforced loyalty, and directed strategic expansions across multiple states. Hoover's genius lay not just in building an empire, but in sustaining it under conditions that would cripple most leaders. The Gangster Disciples had transformed from a street-level gang into a highly organized, multi-state criminal network, guided by an unyielding culture of discipline, strategic foresight, and centralized authority. Hoover's ability to maintain this control remotely was a testament to his intelligence, adaptability, and unparalleled understanding of human behavior. One of Hoover's primary concerns during this period was continued expansion into national criminal networks. He recognized that influence limited to the Midwest could expose vulnerabilities and limit revenue potential. To mitigate this, Hoover cultivated alliances with other gangs across the United States, often negotiating mutually beneficial agreements while maintaining the Gangster Disciples' primacy. These alliances were carefully managed, with strict protocols to prevent betrayal and ensure operational alignment. Hoover's reputation as a disciplined, strategic leader made collaboration desirable for other organizations, as association with the Gangster Disciples carried both respect and strategic advantage. Hoover's management of national alliances required precision. Rival gangs and criminal networks had to be carefully assessed, with loyalty, operational capacity, and cultural alignment taken into account before collaboration. Hoover relied on trusted lieutenants to vet potential allies and maintain oversight of partnerships while ensuring that communication flowed securely. These measures allowed the Gangster Disciples to expand influence without compromising the structural integrity or culture of the organization. Hoover's strategic vision extended beyond simple territorial gain. He sought to create a network of influence that was resilient, coordinated, and capable of sustaining operations under intense scrutiny. Internal discipline remained a cornerstone of Hoover's control. As the organization expanded, the risk of fragmentation and dissent grew. Hoover reinforced strict hierarchical accountability, ensuring that regional leaders adhered to operational protocols and reported directly through the chain of command. Deviations were met with consequences, while loyalty, competence, and strategic initiative were rewarded with increased responsibility and trust. This dual approach discipline tempered by reward maintained cohesion across a complex, geographically dispersed network. Members understood that adherence to Hoover's vision was both a moral and strategic imperative, embedding his authority deeply into the organizational culture. The evolution of communication strategies was central to Hoover's remote leadership. Advanced surveillance and investigative technology required careful management of information flow. Hoover employed secure, coded communication channels and relied on trusted intermediaries to relay instructions. Sensitive operations were compartmentalized, ensuring that no single individual had access to the entirety of organizational strategy. This compartmentalization minimized risk while allowing for coordinated action across multiple states. Hoover's ability to combine operational security with effective command highlighted his exceptional strategic acumen and understanding of organizational dynamics. Financial control remained a critical component of maintaining influence. Revenue streams from drug distribution, protection operations, and allied ventures were carefully monitored and managed. Hoover emphasized transparency, accountability, and strategic allocation of resources, ensuring that operational needs, expansion initiatives, and loyalty enforcement were fully supported. This meticulous approach to financial oversight reinforced operational discipline, maintained organizational stability, and demonstrated Hoover's capacity for long-term strategic planning. By combining financial management with operational control, Hoover ensured the Gangster Disciples remained both powerful and resilient. Despite decades of incarceration, Hoover's psychological influence was formidable. His reputation as a disciplined, intelligent, and strategic leader extended beyond the organization, shaping perceptions across criminal networks and law enforcement agencies alike. Members internalized Hoover's authority not merely out of fear, but from respect for his vision and strategic skill. This perception management allowed Hoover to maintain control without the need for constant physical oversight. His understanding of human behavior, motivation, and loyalty allowed him to orchestrate complex operations from prison, reinforcing the organization's cohesion and effectiveness. The later years also saw Hoover confronting modern criminal challenges. Law enforcement technologies had become more sophisticated, rival gangs more aggressive, and operational risks more complex. Hoover adapted by emphasizing flexibility, vigilance, and strategic foresight. Regional leaders were trained to respond to evolving threats, monitor rival activity, and enforce organizational protocols while remaining accountable to Hoover's directives. This proactive approach to risk management ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained operationally resilient, capable of adapting to changes in the criminal landscape without compromising cohesion or strategic objectives. Hoover's influence extended to the cultural identity of the Gangster Disciples. He reinforced organizational norms, values, and principles, ensuring that members adhered to a shared code of conduct. Discipline, loyalty, strategic thinking, and respect for hierarchy were emphasized as essential to both individual and organizational success. By embedding these principles into the identity of the gang, Hoover created a resilient culture that supported operational efficiency, mitigated internal conflict, and ensured continuity across generations of leadership. Cultural cohesion became as important as operational control in sustaining the Gangster Disciples' power. The management of alliances and rivalries required constant attention. Hoover employed a combination of negotiation, strategic enforcement, and reputation management to maintain balance within the national criminal ecosystem. Conflicts were resolved strategically to minimize risk and maximize organizational advantage. Potential rivals were deterred by Hoover's reputation, while allies were motivated to collaborate through mutual benefit. This balance of power, carefully maintained, allowed the Gangster Disciples to expand influence without overextending resources or provoking destabilizing conflicts. Hoover's strategic approach to intergang relations reinforced both security and authority, enhancing the organization's operational capacity. Mentorship of future leaders continued to be a priority. Hoover prepared capable lieutenants for increased responsibility, emphasizing strategic thinking, operational discipline, and cultural alignment. By cultivating a pipeline of trained, loyal leaders, Hoover ensured that the organization could sustain itself beyond his direct involvement. This long-term planning reflected a visionary understanding of organizational longevity, combining leadership development with operational continuity. Hoover's attention to succession planning guaranteed that the Gangster Disciples would endure as a cohesive, strategically competent network for decades to come. By the end of this period, it was clear that Larry Hoover had created a criminal organization that transcended conventional street-level operations. The Gangster Disciples operated as a highly organized, disciplined, and multi-state network with sophisticated communication, financial, and operational structures. Hoover's ability to maintain absolute control, manage alliances, enforce loyalty, and adapt to evolving challenges demonstrated a level of strategic mastery rarely seen in organized crime. His influence, both operational and psychological, ensured that the organization remained cohesive, resilient, and powerful despite decades of incarceration and unprecedented federal scrutiny. Larry Hoover's story during this period exemplified the extraordinary combination of intelligence, foresight, and leadership necessary to build and sustain a multi-generational criminal empire. His strategic management of internal dynamics, external alliances, operational control, cultural cohesion allowed the Gangster Disciples to flourish even under extreme constraints. Hoover's vision, discipline, and ability to adapt to modern challenges solidified his legacy as one of the most formidable and influential gang leaders in American history, demonstrating that leadership, strategy, and organizational mastery could transcend physical confinement to shape the destiny of an organization for generations. By the mid to late 2010s, Larry Hoover's influence over the Gangster Disciples had reached a level few could rival. Even behind the walls of a maximum security prison, Hoover remained the central strategist, the decision-maker, and the architect of one of the most disciplined and far-reaching criminal networks in the United States. Law enforcement agencies recognized the sophistication of the Gangster Disciples, understanding that dismantling the organization would require more than conventional policing. It required penetrating a hierarchical, multi-state empire meticulously designed for resilience. Hoover's strategic acumen was evident in the way the organization functioned: efficient, disciplined, and adaptive, capable of surviving intense federal scrutiny. One of Hoover's most notable achievements during this period was his continued ability to influence federal investigations. Law enforcement had escalated their efforts, employing RICO statutes, undercover agents, informants, and digital surveillance to monitor communications, trace financial networks, and disrupt operations. Hoover, however, had long anticipated such challenges. He had structured the Gangster Disciples to operate in decentralized compartments, ensuring that critical information was only accessible on a need-to-know basis. This operational security meant that even if a federal investigation compromised one part of the organization, the broader network remained intact. Hoover's foresight turned federal scrutiny from a potential threat into a manageable operational constraint, highlighting his strategic mastery. Hoover's control over communication was essential in this era of heightened law enforcement sophistication. He relied on coded messages, trusted intermediaries, and secure communication channels to issue directives and maintain oversight of regional leaders. Sensitive operations were compartmentalized, with no single individual possessing full knowledge of organizational strategy. This approach minimized exposure, and reduced vulnerability to infiltration, while allowing Hoover to exercise precise control over the network's operation. By maintaining both authority and operational security, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples could continue functioning efficiently under the relentless pressure of federal investigation. The organization's internal hierarchy continued to be a central pillar of Hoover's strategy. Regional lieutenants were empowered to manage day-to-day operations, while remaining fully accountable to Hoover's directives. Discipline and accountability were enforced rigorously. Deviations from protocol or breaches of loyalty were met with swift consequences. At the same time, competent and loyal members were rewarded with authority and trust, reinforcing both obedience and motivation. This dual approach, discipline combined with incentive, ensured organizational cohesion, loyalty, and operational efficiency across multiple states. Hoover's understanding of human behavior allowed him to manage thousands of members from prison, guiding the organization as effectively as if he were physically present on the streets. Hoover also remained a key figure in mediating conflicts both within the organization and with rival gangs. Intergang negotiations, truces, and alliances were carefully orchestrated to maximize strategic advantage while minimizing risk. Hoover's reputation as an intelligent and disciplined leader made these negotiations effective. Allies respected his authority and rivals understood the consequences of challenging it. By controlling relationships with external actors, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples could expand influence, secure revenue streams, and protect territories without unnecessary violence or operational disruption. His ability to manage the delicate balance of power across multiple networks demonstrated a level of strategic sophistication rarely seen in criminal enterprises. Financial oversight became even more critical as federal investigations intensified. Hoover emphasized meticulous monitoring of revenue streams from drug operations, protection rackets, and allied ventures. Allocation of resources, reinvestment in operations, and rewards for loyalty were managed with precision. Financial discipline reinforced operational control, ensuring that resources were available to address both internal and external challenges. Hoover's capacity to oversee a multi-state financial network from prison underscored his intelligence and strategic planning abilities, creating a sustainable structure that could endure legal scrutiny. The psychological influence Hoover exerted over his organization was as important as operational control. By maintaining a reputation for intelligence, discipline, and strategic foresight, Hoover inspired respect, loyalty, and obedience. Members adhered to directives not only because of fear, but because of their belief in his vision and capabilities. This form of influence allowed Hoover to manage complex operations and maintain cohesion even in the absence of physical presence. The perception of his power, carefully cultivated over decades, reinforced organizational stability and minimized challenges to his authority. Despite the increasing pressures from federal authorities, Hoover continued to adapt the organization's strategies. Regional leaders were trained to anticipate law enforcement tactics, manage risk, and maintain operational discipline. Operational security protocols were regularly updated, with an emphasis on discretion, compartmentalization, and strategic planning. The Gangster Disciples became a model of resilience, capable of sustaining operations despite constant legal threats and surveillance. Hoover's leadership ensured that the organization remained proactive rather than reactive, maintaining both its power and its ability to adapt to a changing environment. Succession planning and mentorship also remained central to Hoover's strategy. He prepared loyal, capable lieutenants to assume greater responsibility, ensuring continuity in leadership and operational excellence. By embedding organizational culture, discipline, and strategic thinking into the next generation, Hoover guaranteed that the Gangster Disciples could endure beyond his direct involvement. This long-term vision reflected a level of organizational foresight that was rare, even among legitimate corporations, demonstrating Hoover's ability to combine criminal strategy with institutional sustainability. Hoover's continued influence was also evident in the cultural identity of the Gangster Disciples. Members adhered to strict codes of conduct, embraced organizational values, and internalized the principles of loyalty, discipline, and strategic thinking. This cultural cohesion reinforced operational efficiency, mitigated internal conflict, and ensured that leadership transitions could occur smoothly. Hoover's ability to shape both behavior and ideology ensured that the Gangster Disciples operated as a disciplined and unified entity, capable of maintaining dominance despite decades of incarceration and external pressures. By the late 2010s, it was clear that Larry Hoover had built an organization that transcended conventional street gangs. The Gangster Disciples operated as a highly organized, multi-state criminal network with secure communication systems, disciplined leadership, financial control, and cultural cohesion. Hoover's ability to manipulate operational outcomes remotely, influence national alliances, and maintain cohesion under extreme federal scrutiny exemplified his unparalleled strategic vision. Even in the face of unprecedented legal pressure, the organization remained robust, profitable, and cohesive, a testament to Hoover's enduring authority and tactical brilliance. Larry Hoover's story during this period highlighted the extraordinary combination of intelligence, foresight, and leadership required to build a sustainable criminal empire. By anticipating law enforcement tactics, managing internal dynamics, overseeing multi-state operations, and mentoring the next generation of leaders, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained resilient and dominant. His ability to maintain influence from prison demonstrated that leadership and strategy were not bound by physical presence but could be executed through careful planning, organizational culture, and psychological influence. Hoover's legacy was thus secured not only by his operational achievements, but by his ability to institutionalize leadership, loyalty, and strategic thinking within one of the most formidable criminal networks in American history. By the 2020s, Larry Hoover's influence over the Gangster Disciples had reached an almost legendary status, both within the organization and across the broader criminal landscape. Decades behind bars had not diminished his control, rather, they had solidified his reputation as a strategic mastermind and the ultimate prison-bound crime boss. Hoover's empire, once a localized Chicago street gang, had grown into a multi-state network with sophisticated operational structures, secure communication systems, and a deeply embedded culture of loyalty and discipline. His ability to maintain authority and direct operations remotely exemplified a level of strategic intelligence that few in organized crime history had ever demonstrated. The continued expansion and sophistication of the Gangster Disciples in this era were a direct reflection of Hoover's strategic planning. He had long anticipated the need for decentralized operational management, allowing regional lieutenants to oversee day-to-day activities while reporting back through secure and controlled channels. These lieutenants were selected not only for their operational competence but also for their loyalty and adherence to the organization's cultural values. Hoover's oversight ensured that each branch of the organization remained aligned with his overarching vision, maintaining both cohesion and operational efficiency across hundreds of miles. Hoover's control over internal dynamics became even more critical during this period. With the organization spanning multiple states, the potential for internal power struggles or disloyalty was high. Hoover mitigated these risks through a combination of strict accountability, reinforcement of organizational culture, and selective empowerment. Members understood that deviation from protocol, betrayal, or negligence could result in swift consequences, while loyalty, competence, and initiative were rewarded with increased authority. This balance of discipline and incentive created a highly motivated, cohesive network capable of operating under intense external pressure without fragmenting. Federal authorities continued to intensify their efforts against Hoover and the Gangster Disciples. Advanced surveillance technologies, digital monitoring, undercover agents, and multi-state investigations targeted the organization's operations and leadership hierarchy. Hoover, however, had long built operational resilience into the organization. Compartmentalization ensured that critical operational knowledge was restricted to a few trusted members, minimizing exposure. Secure communication channels and coded messaging allowed directives to be issued without revealing sensitive information. Hoover's foresight ensured that even under intense federal scrutiny, the organization could continue to function effectively, maintaining revenue streams, territorial control, and strategic alliances. Hoover's influence extended far beyond day-to-day operation. He had become a symbol of strategic intelligence, discipline, and leadership within the criminal world. His reputation fostered respect and fear, both inside the Gangster Disciples and among rival organizations. This psychological influence reinforced loyalty, discouraged internal dissent, and ensured that external challenges were approached with caution. Hoover's leadership was not reliant solely on intimidation. It was grounded in strategic foresight, operational success, and a reputation for disciplined control. Members internalized his authority because they recognized both the effectiveness of his directives and the long-term vision behind them. The financial structures of the organization remained meticulously managed under Hoover's oversight. Revenue from drug distribution, protection operations, and allied ventures was carefully tracked, allocated, and reinvested according to strategic priorities. By maintaining financial discipline, Hoover ensured that the organization could fund operational expansions, maintain alliances, and support loyal members while minimizing risk. This level of financial oversight reinforced operational control and demonstrated Hoover's understanding of the importance of resource management in sustaining a complex criminal enterprise. In addition to operational and financial management, Hoover continued to mentor future leaders of the Gangster Disciples. Succession planning had long been a priority, and by the 2020s, It had become essential for the organization's survival. Hoover prepared loyal lieutenants to assume greater responsibility, embedding principles of discipline, strategic thinking, and cultural adherence into the next generation of leadership. This ensured that even as Hoover's direct influence might wane with time, the organization would remain cohesive, strategically competent, and culturally aligned. Hoover's ability to institutionalize leadership reflected an extraordinary level of foresight and organizational acumen. The Gangster Disciples' operational culture under Hoover's guidance continued to emphasize loyalty, discipline, and strategic alignment. Members were expected to follow established protocols, respect hierarchical structures, and internalize organizational values. This cultural cohesion ensured that operations were conducted efficiently, conflicts were minimized, and the organization remained unified despite its geographic dispersion. Hoover's influence was embedded not only in operational directives but in the very identity of the organization, creating a legacy that would endure across generations. Hoover also maintained strategic alliances with other criminal networks. These relationships were carefully managed to maximize mutual benefit while minimizing risk. Hoover's reputation for intelligence, discipline, and strategic foresight made the Gangster Disciples a desirable ally. Conflicts were negotiated and resolved strategically, ensuring that expansion, revenue generation, and territorial control could proceed without unnecessary disruption. Hoover's ability to balance external relationships while maintaining internal cohesion exemplified his mastery of organizational strategy, both operationally and psychologically. Despite the evolving challenges of modern law enforcement and criminal competition, Hoover's organization remained remarkably resilient. The decentralized, compartmentalized structure allowed regional leaders to respond flexibly to threats. 1. The overarching strategic vision ensured that all operations remained aligned with Hoover's objectives: operational security, communication protocols, financial oversight, and mentorship of future leaders combined to create a network capable of enduring extraordinary pressures. Hoover's ability to maintain cohesion, discipline, and operational effectiveness across decades of incarceration demonstrated the unique power of vision and strategic intelligence in sustaining influence. By the end of this period, Larry Hoover's legacy was firmly established. He had transformed the Gangster Disciples from a Chicago street gang into a multi-state, disciplined, and strategically sophisticated organization. His ability to maintain control, enforce loyalty, manage financial and operational systems, and mentor future leaders reflected an extraordinary combination of intelligence, foresight, and leadership skill. Hoover's story was not just one of criminal enterprise, it was a study in organizational strategy, resilience, and the power of leadership executed from behind bars. Hoover's enduring influence illustrated a key lesson in the nature of power. Leadership and authority are not solely defined by physical presence but by strategic vision, discipline, and the ability to embed values and culture within an organization. Through decades of meticulous planning, strategic adaptation, and cultural reinforcement, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained powerful, cohesive, and operationally sophisticated. His story cemented his status as one of the most formidable and influential gang leaders in American history, a leader whose legacy transcended the walls of prison and the limitations of physical confinement. As Larry Hoover progressed further into the 2020s, his influence over the Gangster Disciples and the broader criminal landscape remained unparalleled. Even decades behind bars, Hoover maintained control over a sprawling, multi-state network, demonstrating an extraordinary ability to adapt to evolving challenges, mentor emerging leaders, and safeguard the operational and cultural integrity of his organization. The later years of Hoover's prison leadership highlighted the enduring power of strategic vision, organizational discipline, and psychological influence, proving that even physical confinement could not diminish his authority. One of the most notable aspects of this period was Hoover's ability to interact with emerging criminal organizations and integrate them strategically into the Gangster Disciples network. As gangs evolved in response to new economic opportunities and law enforcement techniques, Hoover recognized that maintaining influence required both vigilance and adaptability. New groups were assessed meticulously, with attention paid to loyalty, operational competence, and alignment with the organization's values. Hoover relied on trusted lieutenants to facilitate these interactions, ensuring that alliances were beneficial, controlled, and non-threatening to the cohesion of the Gangster Disciples. Hoover's mentorship of future leaders remained central to sustaining the organization. With decades of experience at the helm, he was able to impart wisdom, strategic insight, and organizational principles to lieutenants poised to assume greater responsibilities. His letters, coded messages, and guidance emphasized not only operational directives, but also the ideological and cultural values that defined the Gangster Disciples: loyalty, discipline, respect for hierarchy, and strategic thinking were drilled into emerging leaders, creating a pipeline of successors capable of executing Hoover's vision. This focus on mentorship ensured that the organization's identity, operational efficiency, and culture would endure for generations. Internal security and cohesion remained a critical priority during this period. Hoover was acutely aware that fragmentation, betrayal, or power struggles could jeopardize decades of effort. Regional leaders were held strictly accountable for their actions, and deviation from protocol were met with immediate and decisive consequences. At the same time, loyalty, competence, and strategic initiative were rewarded, reinforcing a culture of accountability and motivation. This combination of discipline and incentive created a resilient organizational structure capable of adapting to challenges while maintaining cohesion across vast geographic distances. Hoover's command over operational strategy extended to national criminal alliances. He leveraged his reputation as a disciplined and strategic leader to negotiate truces, coordinate cooperative operations, and manage rivalries. By positioning the Gangster Disciples as both formidable and reliable partners, Hoover expanded the organization's influence and reinforced its dominance. These alliances were carefully monitored and structured to ensure that no partner posed a threat to the core network, while maximizing opportunities for revenue generation, territorial control, and collective security. Hoover's ability to balance these relationships demonstrated his exceptional strategic foresight and organizational intelligence. Financial management continued to be a cornerstone of Hoover's leadership. The Gangster Disciples' multi-state operations relied on careful oversight of revenue streams from drug distribution, protection rackets, and allied ventures. Hoover emphasized meticulous accounting, strategic allocation of resources, and accountability at every level. Operational funding, expansion initiatives, and loyalty rewards were managed with precision, ensuring that the organization remained both profitable and resilient under federal scrutiny. This financial discipline reinforced operational control and highlighted Hoover's strategic capacity for long-term planning and sustainability. During this period, Hoover also adapted to modern criminal trends. The rise of technology in communications, surveillance, and logistics posed both challenges and opportunities. Hoover's guidance emphasized operational discretion, secure communication protocols, and the compartmentalization of sensitive information. Regional leaders were trained to navigate these technological landscapes, anticipate risks, and respond to law enforcement tactics without compromising the organization's structure or objectives. The Gangster Disciples, under Hoover's strategic direction, remained at the forefront of adaptive criminal operations, demonstrating a level of sophistication that few rival organizations could match. The psychological dimension of Hoover's influence was particularly evident in these later years. His reputation as a disciplined, intelligent, and strategic leader created an enduring aura of authority. Members adhered to his directives not merely out of fear, but from respect for his vision and recognition of his operational brilliance. This psychological control, combined with rigorous organizational discipline, ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained cohesive, loyal, and effective, even as the organization expanded geographically and faced unprecedented external pressures. Hoover's understanding of perception, loyalty, and human behavior was as critical to his success as his operational directives. Cultural reinforcement within the Gangster Disciples remained central to Hoover's strategy. He understood that operational efficiency alone could not sustain a multi-generational organization. Members were expected to embody the organization's values, loyalty, discipline, strategic thinking, and respect for hierarchy. These principles were embedded into the organization's identity, ensuring that new generations of leaders internalized the ethos of the Gangster Disciples. Hoover's ability to shape organizational culture from prison demonstrated a level of strategic insight rarely seen, transforming the gang into a disciplined, cohesive, and ideologically aligned criminal network. Hoover also continued to oversee conflict management within the organization and with external actors. Rivalries were managed strategically, with interventions designed to minimize disruption and maximize organizational advantage. Alliances were maintained through negotiation, selective enforcement, and the projection of authority. Hoover's ability to balance internal cohesion with external relationships allowed the Gangster Disciples to expand influence, secure territories, and maintain revenue streams while minimizing unnecessary risk. This careful orchestration of both internal and external dynamics reinforced the organization's resilience and dominance. The later years also highlighted Hoover's extraordinary ability to maintain long-term vision under extraordinary constraints. Even decades into incarceration, his strategic thinking, operational oversight, and mentorship ensured that the Gangster Disciples could continue thriving. Hoover's leadership exemplified the combination of intelligence, foresight, and adaptability necessary to sustain a multi-generational criminal enterprise. By embedding operational discipline, loyalty, cultural identity, and strategic oversight into every level of the organization. Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples were prepared to survive legal pressures, technological challenges, and generational transitions. By this point, Hoover's legacy was firmly established. The Gangster Disciples were no longer just a Chicago street gang. They were a disciplined, sophisticated, and multi-state criminal organization capable of sustaining operations, enforcing loyalty, and expanding influence under conditions that would destabilize most other networks. Hoover's influence was both operational and psychological, shaping behavior, culture, and strategy in ways that would endure for decades. His story in these later years highlighted the power of vision, strategic planning, and leadership executed with precision, even from within the confines of prison. In summary, Larry Hoover's late prison years demonstrated a remarkable combination of adaptability, strategic foresight, and organizational mastery. By mentoring emerging leaders, managing alliances, overseeing operations and finances, and reinforcing a cohesive culture, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained resilient, disciplined, and influential. His ability to maintain control, project authority, and sustain operational excellence from behind bars underscored his enduring status as one of the most formidable leaders in the history of organized crime. Hoover's story was not merely about criminal success, it was about strategic intelligence, leadership, and the ability to institutionalize power across generations. As the 2020s progressed, Larry Hoover's influence over the Gangster Disciples remained extraordinary, even as law enforcement agencies adapted to the modern era of crime fighting. Hoover's decades of experience had taught him that survival and dominance in the criminal underworld required constant adaptation, strategic foresight, and the ability to anticipate both internal and external challenges. Despite his physical confinement in a maximum security prison, Hoover continued to maintain operational oversight, enforce loyalty, and guide the evolution of his organization. The Gangster Disciples, under his direction, remained one of the most disciplined, cohesive, and strategically sophisticated criminal networks in the United States. Hoover's ability to confront evolving law enforcement strategies was a defining feature of his leadership during this period. Federal authorities increasingly employed advanced surveillance technologies, cyber monitoring, undercover agents, and complex financial tracking to dismantle organized crime networks. Hoover, however, had anticipated these developments decades earlier. He had structured the Gangster Disciples with operational compartments, secure communication channels, and trusted intermediaries, ensuring that sensitive information was restricted to only those with a legitimate operational need. This compartmentalization allowed the organization to continue functioning efficiently despite federal scrutiny, minimizing exposure and protecting both revenue streams and leadership integrity. Internal discipline remained a critical priority for Hoover. As the organization expanded geographically and faced new challenges, the potential for disloyalty or fragmentation increased. Hoover enforced strict accountability at all levels of the hierarchy, ensuring that region lieutenants adhered to operational protocols and maintained loyalty among their subordinates. Deviations from protocol, breaches of trust, or attempts to consolidate unauthorized power were swiftly addressed, while loyalty, competence, and initiative were rewarded. This dual approach of strict enforcement coupled with selective empowerment reinforced organizational cohesion and ensured that the Gangster Disciples could continue operating smoothly across multiple states. The management of national alliances also became increasingly important. Hoover's reputation as a disciplined, intelligent, and strategic leader made him a desirable partner for emerging and established criminal organizations alike. He carefully evaluated potential allies based on loyalty, operational capability, and alignment with the Gangster Disciples' cultural values. Strategic alliances were maintained through negotiation, selective enforcement of agreements, and demonstration of authority, allowing the organization to expand influence, secure revenue streams, and maintain territorial control without unnecessary conflict. Hoover's ability to balance the demands of multiple alliances while maintaining internal discipline exemplified his exceptional strategic acumen. Financial management during this period was critical to sustaining operational resilience. Revenue from drug operations, protection rackets, and allied ventures was carefully monitored and strategically allocated. Hoover emphasized transparency, accountability, and efficiency in financial operations, ensuring that resources were available for expansion, loyalty reinforcement, and operational security. By maintaining tight control over finances, Hoover strengthened both the stability and adaptability of the organization, ensuring it could survive federal interventions, internal challenges, and fluctuations in criminal markets. Hoover's psychological influence over the Gangster Disciples continued to be a defining factor in the organization's cohesion and effectiveness. Members adhered to his directives not only out of fear, but out of respect for his strategic vision, operational brilliance, and leadership capabilities. This psychological authority reinforced loyalty, minimized internal dissent, and allowed Hoover to orchestrate complex operations remotely. By cultivating an aura of respect and fear, Hoover ensured that his authority remained unchallenged, creating an organizational culture that valued discipline, accountability, and strategic thinking. Operational adaptation became increasingly vital as law enforcement tactics evolved. Regional leaders were trained to anticipate surveillance, respond to emerging threats, and execute strategic objectives without compromising the broader network. Hoover's instructions emphasized flexibility, discretion, and adherence to protocol, ensuring that the Gangster Disciples remained resilient despite the growing sophistication of federal investigations. Compartmentalization of information, secure messaging, and operational oversight allowed the organization to maintain effectiveness, even under unprecedented pressure. Hoover's ability to combine foresight with practical operational control exemplified his unique capacity for leadership in extreme conditions. Mentorship and succession planning remained central to Hoover's strategy. As he aged, ensuring the continuity of leadership became increasingly important. Loyal, capable lieutenants were groomed to assume greater responsibility, absorbing not only operational knowledge, but also the organizational culture and strategic priorities that defined the Gangster Disciples. Hoover's mentorship emphasized critical thinking, risk assessment, and disciplined decision-making, preparing the next generation to uphold his vision while responding effectively to emerging challenges. By embedding leadership development into the organizational structure, Hoover guaranteed both resilience and continuity. Cultural cohesion continued to underpin Hoover's organizational strategy. Members of the Gangster Disciples were expected to internalize the organization's values, loyalty, discipline, respect for hierarchy, and strategic thinking. This cultural alignment reinforced operational efficiency, minimized internal conflict, and facilitated coordination across geographically dispersed branches. Hoover's focus on cultural reinforcement ensured that the organization's identity remained intact despite the pressures of modern law enforcement and the challenges of generational leadership transitions. Conflict management, both internally and externally, remained a key focus for Hoover. Rivalries with other gangs, disputes within the organization, and challenges to authority were addressed with strategic precision. Hoover leveraged his reputation, intelligence, and understanding of human behavior to resolve conflicts in ways that minimize disruption while enhancing the organization's influence. By maintaining control over both internal dynamics and external relationships, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples continue expanding, generating revenue, and consolidating power without unnecessary risk or instability. Hoover's long-term strategic vision was evident in the organization's ability to adapt to modern criminal trends. Technological advances, shifting markets, and evolving criminal behaviors were integrated into operational planning. Regional leaders were trained to manage risk, maintain operational security, and optimize efficiency, while remaining aligned with Hoover's directives. The Gangster Disciples evolved from a street-level gang into a highly organized, technologically aware, and operationally sophisticated network capable of sustaining dominance across multiple states. Hoover's strategic foresight ensured that the organization remained relevant, resilient, and powerful in the modern era. By the mid-2020s, it was clear that Larry Hoover's leadership had produced an organization that transcended the conventional limits of gang activity. The Gangster Disciples operated with precision, discipline, and strategic intelligence, maintaining operational effectiveness, financial stability, and cultural cohesion despite decades of incarceration. Hoover's influence, both psychological and operational, ensured that the organization remained cohesive, loyal, and strategically aligned. His ability to maintain authority under extreme constraints exemplified the power of foresight, planning, and disciplined leadership in sustaining organizational dominance. Larry Hoover's story during this period underscored the extraordinary combination of intelligence, adaptability, and leadership necessary to sustain a multi-generational criminal enterprise. By managing law enforcement pressures, internal dynamics, alliances, finances, and organizational culture, Hoover maintained control over one of the most formidable criminal networks in American history. His ability to project authority, mentor future leaders, and guide operations from behind bars demonstrate that strategic intelligence and organizational mastery could transcend physical confinement. Hoover's enduring influence reinforced his legacy as a visionary leader, a master strategist, and a figure whose impact on organized crime would resonate for decades to come. By the late 2020s, Larry Hoover's enduring influence over the Gangster Disciples had become nothing short of legendary. Decades behind bars had not weakened his authority. If anything, they had enhanced the perception of his power and strategic brilliance. From the confines of a high-security prison, Hoover continued to exert precise control over his organization, ensuring that its operations, culture, and expansion remained aligned with his decades-long vision. The Gangster Disciples had transformed from a Chicago street gang into a multi-state, disciplined, and highly sophisticated criminal network, capable of adapting to modern law enforcement techniques while maintaining cohesion and operational dominance. One of the most critical aspects of Hoover's leadership during this period was the consolidation of his legacy. Having guided the organization for over 5 decades, Hoover recognized that the survival of the Gangster Disciples depended on embedding his strategic vision into every layer of the organization. He focused on reinforcing operational discipline, ensuring that regional lieutenants and emerging leaders fully understood and adhered to his protocols. Through mentorship, coded communications, and trusted intermediaries, Hoover emphasized the importance of loyalty, strategic thinking, and adherence to the cultural norms that defined the Gangster Disciples. These efforts ensured that the organization would remain cohesive and operationally effective, regardless of the challenges it faced. Hoover's organizational strategy relied heavily on decentralization, allowing regional leaders to manage day-to-day operations while remaining accountable to him. This structure ensured that the Gangster Disciples could operate effectively across multiple states without compromising central oversight. Each regional lieutenant was carefully selected based on competence, loyalty, and alignment with the organization's cultural values. Hoover's approach allowed him to maintain strategic control while delegating operational responsibilities, creating a resilient network capable of responding to local challenges while remaining unified under a common vision. Financial management continued to be a cornerstone of Hoover's influence. The Gangster Disciples maintained multiple revenue streams, including drug distribution, protection rackets, and allied ventures, all of which were carefully monitored and strategically allocated. Hoover emphasized financial discipline, transparency, and accountability, ensuring that resources were available for operational expansion, loyalty reinforcement, and organizational sustainability. By maintaining tight control over finances, Hoover strengthened the Gangster Disciples' capacity to survive law enforcement pressures, internal disputes, and external competition, while continuing to fund strategic initiatives that reinforced the organization's dominance. As law enforcement strategies evolved, Hoover demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Surveillance technology, digital monitoring, and cyber investigations became increasingly sophisticated. Yet the Gangster Disciples continued to operate efficiently. Hoover's instructions emphasized discretion, operational compartmentalization, and risk management. Sensitive information was restricted to only those with a legitimate operational need, and secure communication protocols were rigorously enforced. Regional leaders were trained to anticipate federal tactics, respond proactively to threats, and maintain operational discipline, ensuring that the organization remained resilient in the face of unprecedented scrutiny. Hoover's ability to adapt to modern investigative methods underscored his strategic brilliance and operational foresight. Hoover's influence extended beyond operational control into the psychological and cultural dimensions of the organization. His reputation as a disciplined, intelligent, and strategic leader fostered respect and loyalty among members. Obedience was reinforced not only through fear of consequences but through recognition of Hoover's vision and effectiveness. Members internalized his authority, understanding that adherence to his directives was essential to both individual survival and the organization's long-term success. This psychological influence ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained cohesive, motivated, and aligned with Hoover's strategic objectives, even across generations of leadership. The cultural identity of the Gangster Disciples remained a critical focus for Hoover. He reinforced organizational norms and values, emphasizing loyalty, discipline, respect for hierarchy, and strategic thinking. These principles were embedded deeply into the organization's identity, shaping behavior and decision-making at every level. By creating a culture that internalized his values, Hoover ensured that operational protocols were consistently followed, conflicts were minimized, and leadership transitions could occur smoothly. Cultural cohesion became as important as operational efficiency in maintaining the Gangster Disciples' dominance. Conflict management remained another central aspect of Hoover's leadership. Rival gangs, internal disputes, and challenges to authority were addressed strategically. Hoover leveraged his reputation, strategic foresight, and understanding of human behavior to negotiate truces, enforce agreements, and mitigate risks. This approach allowed the Gangster Disciples to maintain territorial control, expand influence, and generate revenue without unnecessary disruption or violence. Hoover's ability to manage both internal and external conflicts reinforced the organization's stability and demonstrated the sophistication of his leadership. Mentorship and succession planning continued to shape the organization's future. Hoover identified loyal, capable members to assume increasing responsibility, ensuring that knowledge, operational expertise, and organizational values were passed to the next generation. Emerging leaders were trained to think strategically, anticipate threats, and maintain loyalty among their subordinates. This intentional grooming of successors guaranteed that Hoover's vision would persist, allowing the Gangster Disciples to operate as a disciplined, cohesive, and strategically competent organization for years to come. By consolidating his legacy, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples could withstand the pressures of modern criminal landscapes. Technological advances, law enforcement innovations, and shifting criminal market posed significant challenges. Yet the organization adapted seamlessly. Operational compartmentalization, secure communication protocols, financial oversight, and disciplined leadership allowed the Gangster Disciples to maintain influence, profitability, and cohesion despite these challenges. Hoover's enduring guidance ensured that the organization remained relevant, resilient, and dominant in the modern era. Hoover's strategic vision extended beyond immediate operations to long-term sustainability. He recognized that survival required embedding resilience into the organizational structure, creating a network capable of adapting to generational changes, leadership transitions, and evolving external pressures. By institutionalizing principles of loyalty, discipline, and strategic thinking, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples would continue to thrive even in the absence of his direct oversight. His ability to combine operational mastery with cultural reinforcement allowed the organization to endure as a cohesive and strategically sophisticated entity. By the late 2020s, Larry Hoover's story had become a testament to the power of leadership, strategy, and organizational foresight. From a street-level gang leader to the architect of a multi-state criminal empire, Hoover had transformed the Gangster Disciples into one of the most disciplined and influential organizations in American criminal history. His ability to maintain authority from prison, mentor future leaders, manage complex operations, and reinforce organizational culture ensured that his influence would persist for generations. Hoover's legacy was not only in his operational achievements, but in the enduring strength, cohesion, and strategic sophistication of the Gangster Disciples. In conclusion, Chapter 18 illustrates the consolidation of Larry Hoover's legacy. Through disciplined leadership, strategic foresight, cultural reinforcement, and mentorship of future leaders, Hoover ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained resilient, cohesive, and dominant. His ability to maintain operational control, manage alliances, and adapt to modern law enforcement techniques demonstrated a level of intelligence and organizational mastery that transcended the confines of prison. Hoover's enduring influence cemented his status as one of the most formidable, visionary, and strategically brilliant figures in the history of organized crime, leaving a legacy that would resonate for decades to come. As the Gangster Disciples entered the late 2020s, Larry Hoover's influence had reached its zenith. Decades of incarceration had not diminished his power. Instead, they had reinforced his status as a legendary figure whose authority, vision, and strategic genius extended far beyond the prison walls. Hoover's ability to maintain operational control, enforce loyalty, and adapt to modern criminal challenges had transformed the organization into a highly disciplined, multi-state criminal network capable of thriving under extraordinary scrutiny. The Gangster Disciples were no longer merely a street gang. They were an institution, a legacy built on decades of meticulous planning, strategic foresight, and organizational mastery. The culmination of Hoover's influence was evident in the organization's structure. Regional leaders operated with autonomy but remained strictly accountable to Hoover's directives, creating a balance between decentralization and centralized control. Each lieutenant was carefully chosen for loyalty, competence, and alignment with the organization's cultural and operational values. Hoover's system ensured that decision-making could occur locally without compromising the cohesion or strategic vision of the broader network. This approach allowed the Gangster Disciples to adapt rapidly to local challenges while maintaining operational alignment with Hoover's overarching objectives. Operational security remained a cornerstone of Hoover's leadership. In the modern era, law enforcement agencies utilized sophisticated surveillance, cyber monitoring, and undercover operations to dismantle criminal networks. Hoover had long anticipated these developments and implemented a system of compartmentalized knowledge, coded communications, and trusted intermediaries. Sensitive information was restricted to only those who needed it for operation purposes, reducing exposure and minimizing the risk of infiltration. This structure allowed the organization to continue its operations seamlessly, despite constant scrutiny and heightened legal pressure. Financial management under Hoover's guidance was meticulously organized. The Gangster Disciples' revenue streams derived from drug distribution, protection, rackets, and allied ventures were carefully monitored and strategically allocated. Hoover emphasized transparency, accountability, and disciplined reinvestment of resources to support operational expansion, reward loyalty, and ensure the organization's long-term sustainability. By maintaining strict financial oversight, Hoover strengthened both the stability and adaptability of the network, allowing the organization to operate effectively under modern law enforcement constraints. The psychological influence Hoover exerted over the Gangster Disciples was as critical as operational control. Members adhered to his directives not only out of fear of consequences but also out of respect for his strategic vision and proven effectiveness. Hoover had cultivated an aura of authority that transcended physical presence. His reputation alone maintained cohesion, discouraged dissent, and reinforced loyalty. This psychological dominance allowed him to orchestrate complex operations remotely, ensuring that the organization remained disciplined, motivated, and aligned with his long-term goals. Cultural cohesion was another defining feature of Hoover's strategy. Members of the Gangster Disciples were expected to internalize values of loyalty, discipline, strategic thinking, and respect for hierarchy. These principles were embedded into the organization's identity, ensuring that all operational decisions, from small-scale enforcement to large-scale strategic initiatives, aligned with Hoover's vision. By creating a deeply ingrained culture, Hoover ensured continuity, minimized internal conflict, and maintained cohesion across multiple states and generations of leadership. Mentorship and succession planning continued to secure the organization's future. Hoover had long recognized that his personal involvement would eventually wane, and that the Gangster Disciples' survival depended on a pipeline of capable, loyal leaders. He trained regional lieutenants and emerging leaders in operational strategy, risk assessment, and organizational values, ensuring that the next generation could uphold his vision. This deliberate cultivation of talent guaranteed that the organization would remain resilient, strategical, competent, and cohesive, even in the face of generational transitions and evolving criminal landscapes. Conflict management remained a central aspect of Hoover's leadership. Rival gangs, internal disputes, and challenges to authority were addressed with precision and strategic foresight. Hoover's reputation, intelligence, and understanding of human behavior enabled him to negotiate alliances, enforce agreements, and mitigate risk. This strategic approach minimized disruption, preserved organizational resources, and enhanced the Gangster Disciples' influence and territorial control. By managing conflict both internally and externally, Hoover ensured that the organization remained stable, cohesive, and capable of executing long-term strategic objectives. Adaptation to modern criminal trends was a hallmark of Hoover's enduring influence. Technology, law enforcement innovations, and shifting market dynamics posed new challenges, yet the Gangster Disciples continued to operate effectively. Hoover emphasized discretion, operational compartmentalization, and strategic flexibility, allowing regional leaders to respond to emerging threats without compromising the organization's broader objectives. This adaptability ensured that the Gangster Disciples remained relevant, resilient, and profitable, maintaining dominance despite the evolving landscape of organized crime. By the late 2020s, Hoover's story had become emblematic of leadership, strategy, and organizational mastery. From his early days as a street-level gang leader in Chicago to the architect of a multi-state criminal empire, Hoover had transformed the Gangster Disciples into a disciplined, sophisticated, and enduring institution. His influence extended beyond operational directives to encompass culture, mentorship, financial management, and strategic foresight. Hoover's ability to maintain authority, guide operations, and shape behavior from prison highlighted the extraordinary combination of intelligence, vision, and leadership necessary to sustain a multi-generational criminal enterprise. The modern state of the Gangster Disciples reflected Hoover's strategic genius. The organization operated as a highly coordinated network, with regional leaders executing operations in alignment with Hoover's vision. Loyalty, discipline, and cultural adherence remained central to its identity, ensuring that operational effectiveness was maintained even as the organization adapted to changing circumstances. Financially, the organization continued to thrive under strict oversight, reinvesting in operational expansion and rewarding loyalty to maintain cohesion. Hoover's influence ensured that the Gangster Disciples were not only surviving in the modern criminal environment but actively thriving. The culmination of Hoover's decades-long influence was evident in the organization's resilience. Despite multiple generations of leadership, evolving criminal trends, and intensified law enforcement pressure. The Gangster Disciples remained cohesive, disciplined, and strategically competent. Hoover's long-term planning, mentorship of future leaders, and embedding of culture and operational norms ensured continuity, stability, and adaptability. His ability to project authority, influence behavior, and maintain operational oversight from prison secured the organization's dominance and preserved his legacy as one of the most formidable leaders in the history of organized crime. Larry Hoover's story concluded not as a tale of mere criminal activity but as an unparalleled example of strategic vision, leadership, and organizational mastery. By combining operational control, mentorship, financial oversight, cultural reinforcement, and psychological influence, Hoover created a network capable of enduring extreme legal, operational, and generational challenges. His legacy was institutionalized in the Gangster Disciples, a disciplined, cohesive, and strategically sophisticated organization that would continue to operate and expand for decades to come. Hoover's enduring influence cemented his status as a visionary leader whose impact on organized crime would resonate long after his physical confinement. In the end, Larry Hoover's life and leadership exemplified the extraordinary power of strategy, foresight, and disciplined execution. From his earliest days on the streets of Chicago to the pinnacle of his authority as a prison-bound criminal mastermind, Hoover's ability to think strategically, enforce loyalty, adapt to evolving challenges, and institutionalize his vision ensured that his organization would remain dominant, cohesive, and resilient. The Gangster Disciples, under Hoover's guidance, stood as a testament to his genius, a living, operational legacy of power, discipline, and strategic brilliance that transcended both time and physical boundaries.